The rose-coloured taper had burned down to the width of Hester Wrenford's little finger. Yet, she had carried it for a year, as though it were a witness, who might one day gather courage and speak. London, May 1816, had dressed itself in candlelight and polished carriage lamps, and Mayfair glittered as if no heart had ever been broken beneath its chandeliers. From the window of her aunt's drawing-room, Hester watched footmen move along the pavement with lanterns, watched silk-clad ladies vanish into bright doorways, watched the season resume its graceful cruelties with the perfect confidence of something that had never been punished. Behind her, Lady Pamela Wrenford's maid fastened the last pearl pin into Hester's dark hair with hands that were too practiced to tremble. The gown was pale grey silk, respectable, unfashionable by 2 inches at the sleeve, and altered so neatly that only another woman in reduced circumstances would have noticed where the old seams had been let out and taken in again. Lady Pamela had chosen it because it said nothing too loudly. Hester had accepted it for the same reason. She had learned, during her year in Bath, that silence could be worn like mourning, even when no one had died. Only hope had. "You will not mention last year," Lady Pamela said, from beside the mantel, where she stood with one hand on her reticule and the other on her nerves. "You will not look wounded. You will not permit anyone to think we have been hiding you." Hester lowered her gaze to the small reticule resting in her lap. Inside it, wrapped in a square of linen, lay the rose-coloured beeswax taper stub. "I have not been hiding, Aunt. Bath is hiding when one leaves London after a duke ceases to call." The words were not shouted. Lady Pamela never shouted. She had the sort of voice that could cut bread without disturbing the crumbs. "You were fortunate that no formal understanding existed. Had there been letters, witnesses, anything definite, the situation would have been worse." Hester closed her gloved fingers over the reticule clasp. There had been no formal understanding. There had only been a dozen conversations too careful for gossip and too warm for indifference. There had been Clement Vale, Duke of Tillingham, standing beside a supper-room window while candlelight trembled over his austere face, saying her name as if he had found it in a book he meant to keep. There had been one rose taper between them, its flame bowing in the draught when the terrace door opened. He had lifted his hand, shielding that small flame with the breadth of his palm, not touching her, not claiming her, only preserving the light between them. "You will catch cold," he had said. "I'm not so fragile as that, Your Grace." "No," he had answered, and his eyes had held hers with an attention that made the crowded room vanish. "I had begun to suspect you were not fragile at all." Later, he had promised to return after speaking with Lord Arkwright. Later, the candles in the supper-room had guttered, several going out at once, sending a soft confusion through the guests. Later still, Clement had passed her without stopping. His face had been closed, his courtesy exact, his absence more public than an insult. By morning, London had known. By the end of the week, Hester had been the lady who had presumed too much upon a duke's attention. By June, Lady Pamela had decided Bath air was necessary for Hester's health. No one had asked what had happened in the dark. No one had asked Hester anything at all. "Lady Arkwright's subscription supper is not a trial," Lady Pamela continued, as if trying to convince herself. "It is charitable, respectable, carefully chosen. You will speak to elderly ladies, admire the arrangements, and leave early if necessary." "And if they whisper?" Hester asked. Lady Pamela's mouth tightened. "They will whisper less if you appear unaffected." Hester almost smiled. Women were always being instructed to appear unaffected by the very people who had arranged the wound. She rose, smoothing her gloves. "Then I shall appear exactly as I am." Her aunt looked sharply at her. "And what is that supposed to mean, present?" For a moment, Lady Pamela seemed to have no answer. The clock on the mantel gave a small, bright chime, and downstairs the hired carriage wheels sounded over the stones. Hester opened her reticule and touched the wrapped taper once, not for comfort, but for steadiness. It had been foolish to keep it. She knew that a half-burned candle was not proof of tenderness, not proof of betrayal, not proof of anything a room full of titled people would respect. Yet she had taken it from the supper table that night after everyone had gone, when the servants were clearing glasses, and pretending not to see the lady who stood alone among cooling wax and extinguished wicks. She had told herself she kept it because it was wasteful to leave good beeswax behind. She had known she was lying. It was the last thing in that room that had not changed its nature. A flame had burned. Someone had put it out. The remnant remained. At Lady Arkwright's house, the windows blazed with gold. Carriages crowded the street, their lacquered doors reflecting candlelight from the entrance hall. Footmen in livery moved with silver trays and disciplined expressions. The air smelled of damp wool, orange peel, hot wax, and the faint powdery sweetness of flowers arranged in too many vases. Hester stepped down with Lady Pamela's fingers tight around her arm. The touch was not affection. It was management. Inside, the staircase rose beneath garlands of white ribbon and ivy. A long table near the supper room displayed subscription books for widows of naval officers, each page waiting for noble names and noble sums. Ladies bent over it with jeweled pens, giving charity in a manner that ensured no one missed the generosity. Hester had been raised to understand such rooms. She knew where unmarried women of uncertain fortune stood. Not too near the entrance, where one looked eager, not too near the musicians, where one looked neglected, not too close to married women who might find one inconvenient. The art of survival lay in occupying space without appearing to claim it. She had once excelled at that art. Tonight, she was tired of it. "Lady Hester Wrenford," Lady Arkwright said, advancing with a smile that was warm enough for public use. "How pleasant to see you. Return to town." "You are kind, Lady Arkwright. And Lady Pamela, you arrive at a fortunate moment. We have had a small difficulty with the rose tapers for the memorial display. The servants have set them unevenly, and my eyes are not what they were. Lady Hester, you always had a steady hand. Would you be so good?" Lady Pamela's fingers tightened in warning. Hester looked past Lady Arkwright into the supper room. Along the far sideboard, rose-coloured tapers stood in silver sticks among sprigs of rosemary and folded subscription cards. A memorial display, a charity gesture, a harmless row of little flames waiting to be corrected. Her breath caught once, so quietly no one could accuse it of being feeling. "Of course," she said, "I should be pleased to help." Lady Pamela leaned close. "Hester, it is only candlelight, Aunt." But it was not only candlelight. It had never been only candlelight. As Hester crossed the threshold into the supper room, conversation thinned by degrees. Not stopped. Society was too well trained for that. It merely softened around her, becoming that dangerous murmur which pretended not to have a subject. She felt eyes touch her gown, her face, her left hand, her empty side. There she is, returned at last. Poor thing, or not poor at all, depending on what one believed she had tried to do. She reached the sideboard and began adjusting the tapers, one by one, turning each silver stick so the flames stood evenly before the mirrored panel. The glass reflected a woman she almost recognized. Dark hair, grey silk, shoulders straight, mouth calm. A face neither young enough to be excused nor old enough to be free. How composed she looks, someone whispered behind a fan. One must admire nerve, if nothing else. Hester lifted the next taper. Its wax was too pale, nearly pink rather than rose. Without thinking, she opened her reticule and drew out the linen-wrapped stub. The old beeswax lay in her palm like a small, extinguished heart. Its color was deeper than the new tapers. Its blackened wick curled inward, and beneath the fading scent of linen there remained the faintest trace of bayberry. She set it beside the display to compare the shades. A silver tray beneath her hand gave a soft chime. The sound carried. A lady nearby stopped speaking. Another turned. Hester became aware, too late, that the old taper had rolled free of its linen and rested in plain sight beneath the candles, a ridiculous object, a remnant, a memory made visible. Lady Pamela inhaled behind her. Hester did not snatch it back. She had been made ridiculous once by waiting. She would not be made ridiculous now by haste. She picked up the taper stub, slowly, and folded the linen around it with hands that did not shake. "Lady Hester," Lady Arkwright said, uncertain now, "are you unwell?" Before Hester could answer, a footman's voice sounded from the entrance hall, clear enough to travel through the supper room and settle over every flame. His Grace, the Duke of Tillingham. The room changed, not loudly. No glass broke, no woman cried out, no gentleman forgot himself. It was worse than that. Every practiced motion paused by half a breath. Fans hovered, a spoon touched china and did not stir. Lady Pamela's hand found the back of a chair. Hester stood with the wrapped taper in her palm and felt the past enter the room wearing polished evening black. She did not turn at once. She watched the flames in the mirror first. They leaned toward the door as if the air itself had recognized him. Then, in the glass, she saw Clement Vale. A year had not softened him. If anything, it had cut him finer. He stood at the supper room threshold with his dark hair brushed back, his expression controlled, his shoulders carrying the effortless authority of a man born above apology. Ladies inclined toward him. Gentlemen made space. Beside the doorway, Lady Blanche Nettleby lifted her chin as though she had been expecting him to look first at her. He did not. Clement's gaze crossed the room and found Hester in the mirror. For one suspended instant, no one breathed. Hester turned then, because she would not be caught, looking at him only through reflection. His eyes dropped to her hand, to the linen, to the small rose-colored taper stub half hidden against her glove. Something moved across his face, too brief to be called emotion by anyone who did not know what control cost him. Recognition, pain, or perhaps only surprise. Hester could not afford to name it, not yet. Lady Arkwright began. "Your Grace, we are honored that you could join our modest effort for the Widow's Fund." Clement bowed with perfect courtesy, but his attention did not leave Hester. Lady Arkwright. His voice was low, even, and dangerously quiet. "Lady Pamela." Then he crossed the room. The distance was not great. It felt enormous. The whispering died as he approached, each step taking command of another circle of silence. Hester remembered that walk from last year. She remembered waiting for it to return to her. She remembered how it had passed her by. This time, she did not wait. She stood still because stillness was hers. A taper near her elbow flickered suddenly in a draught from the hall. Clement's hand lifted, instinctive and restrained, shielding the little flame before it failed. His fingers stopped a breath from hers. No touch, only warmth, waxlight, and the terrible courtesy of a man who had once guarded a flame and abandoned the woman beside it. Hester looked from his hand to his face. "Your Grace," she said, 2 syllables, a wall and a wound. The whole supper-room fell silent. Clement's hand remained between the taper and the draught for no more than 2 breaths. But in those 2 breaths, Hester felt the whole room watching to see whether she would flinch toward him or away. She did neither. She folded the linen more securely around the old rose-colored stub and lowered it into her reticule with the care of a woman putting away something too small to matter and too dangerous to expose. Only then did she lift her eyes to his. The Duke of Tillingham had always possessed the infuriating stillness of men who had never needed to ask permission to occupy space. Tonight, that stillness had a fracture in it, not visible enough for the room to use, visible enough for Hester to see. His gaze had gone once to the taper, once to her face, and then stayed there, as though a year had not taught him how to look away properly. "Lady Hester," he said. Her name, spoken in that quiet voice, travelled farther than any raised accusation could have done. A lady near the sideboard stopped turning the stem of her glass. Lady Arkwright's smile froze into politeness. Lady Pamela's breathing became sharp enough to hear. "Your Grace," Hester answered, because she had already given him that much and would not give him more. The taper at her elbow steadied under his shielding hand. When the flame stood upright again, he withdrew. Not quickly, not as if ashamed. As if he understood that any sudden movement might be mistaken for guilt, claim, or apology. "I hope you have been well," he said. It was the kind of sentence society adored because it said almost nothing and threatened to reveal everything. Hester might have answered as women were trained to answer. "Very well, thank you. Quite restored." Bath was agreeable. Instead, she let the silence hold 1 beat longer than comfort allowed. "I have been present, Your Grace." A breath moved through the room. Someone did not understand the answer. Someone else understood it too well. Clement's eyes changed, not softening, precisely, but losing some layer of cold polish. "Then London is corrected by your return." There was no flirtation in it. That made it worse. Had he offered gallantry, she could have dismissed it. Had he offered regret, she could have refused it. This sounded like recognition, and recognition was the one thing she had once starved for until hunger itself became humiliating. Lady Blanche Nettleby came forward before the pause could deepen. She was a graceful woman in ivory silk, with pale hair arranged in artful loops and a smile so smooth it seemed poured rather than formed. Hester had seen that smile many times the previous year. It had always appeared near Clement, near powerful women, near any opening through which ambition might pass dressed as sweetness. "Your Grace," Blanche said, dipping the exact depth required by his rank and no farther. "Lady Arkwright feared you had been detained at White's. How fortunate that you arrived before the display was complete." Clement inclined his head. "Lady Blanche." He did not say fortunate. Hester noticed. Blanche noticed too, though only the faintest tightening at her mouth betrayed it. She turned to the sideboard with a laugh as light as sugar on glass. "Lady Hester has been assisting with the tapers. So steady of her. I confess I should be useless with flames. They do expose every tremor, don't they?" There it was, not a wound, only the tip of a needle, small enough that protesting would make one look absurd, sharp enough to draw blood. Hester reached for the next silver candlestick and turned it a fraction so the row stood even. "Only when one has something to conceal, Lady Blanche." The lady's fan paused. Clement looked at Hester then, with a sudden, fierce attention that almost warmed the air between them. Hester hated herself for feeling it. Admiration from him had once been a door. She would not mistake it now for shelter. Lady Arkwright hurried in with the voice of a hostess saving crystal from a careless elbow. "How beautifully arranged. Lady Hester, you have my thanks. The rose tapers were made specially for the widow's subscription. Such a charming shade, is it not? Though I must say they never match from year to year." "No," Clement said, "they do not." It was a simple statement, yet Hester felt the words settle over the old taper hidden in her reticule. He remembered. That was the first true danger of the evening, not Blanche's smile, not Pamela's panic. Clement remembered the colour of the wax. A gentleman at the end of the table murmured something about subscriptions, and the room seized upon the safer topic with gratitude. Pages turned, coins chimed. A footman entered with a tray of ratafia glasses. Conversation resumed, though its eyes remained fixed on the space between Hester and Clement. Lady Pamela moved to Hester's side. "You have done enough," she whispered. "Come away." Hester would have gone, not in surrender, but because she had promised herself not to feed the room more of her pulse than it deserved. Then a young matron in blue satin, whose name Hester did not recall, looked at the sideboard and said with false innocence, "How odd. I had thought Lady Hester disliked supper rooms after last season." The sentence was not loud. It was perfectly pitched, near enough for Clement, near enough for Blanche, near enough for three women to pretend horror after enjoying it. Lady Pamela's grip closed on Hester's arm, urging retreat. Hester felt the old familiar calculation. If she answered, she would be spirited and therefore dangerous. If she remained silent, the remark would stand. If Clement answered for her, the room would make a new story before the candles burned an inch lower. He moved before she had chosen. Only a little. A shift of weight, a turn of shoulder, protection, beginning. Hester saw it and understood with a clarity that hurt. He meant to help. He had perhaps meant to help before in whatever cold arithmetic had made him abandon her. Men like Clement could mistake action for justice when the action spared them the harder work of listening. Hester lifted her hand, not toward him, not touching him, only enough to stop the movement. His gaze dropped to that small command and obeyed it. That obedience shook her more than his defense would have done. She turned to the blue satin matron. "You were misinformed. I dislike rooms where no one asks an honest question. This one may yet improve." For the second time, the supper room went quiet. This silence was thinner than the first, sharper at the edges. Lady Arkwright made a small sound between a cough and a prayer. Blanche's eyes cooled. Clement did not smile. Something in his face altered, and for one impossible instant, Hester saw not the Duke who had left her waiting, but the man who had once stood beside a window and watched her as if her courage had surprised him into reverence. Lady Hester was asked to assist. Clement said at last, his voice mild enough to be lethal, not to be judged. The blue satin matron flushed. Her husband suddenly discovered intense interest in the subscription book. Hester did not thank Clement. Gratitude would have implied rescue, and she had rescued herself first. Yet she could not pretend his words had done nothing. They had not erased the insult. They had placed a boundary around it. That was new. Lady Blanche closed her fan with a soft snap. "Surely no one meant judgment, Your Grace. We all know how stories grow in London. A candle goes out, a whisper begins, and by morning some poor lady has been made the heroine of a tale she never intended." Hester looked at her. There was something too deliberate in the phrase. A candle goes out, a whisper begins. It struck Hester not as memory, but as rehearsal. Clement's attention shifted to Blanche very slowly. An interesting sequence. A common one, Blanche replied. Common things deserve examination, he said. The words were quiet, but Blanche's colour changed by half a shade. Hester saw it. So did Clement. The knowledge did not pass between them as alliance. Not yet. But it stood there, fragile and lit, like the flame he had shielded without touching her hand. Lady Arkwright announced that supper would be served in the adjoining room, and the company moved with relieved elegance, grateful for plates and chairs, and anything that allowed them to pretend the last 5 minutes had not happened. Hester remained by the sideboard long enough to close her reticule. The old taper lay inside, wrapped again. It felt heavier than wax had any right to feel. Clement stayed near, though not too near. He had learned at least that much in a year, or perhaps guilt had taught him manners feeling never had. Lady Hester, he said, I would ask permission to call upon Lady Pamela tomorrow. Her pulse betrayed her before her face could. That is a matter for my aunt. No, he said then, seemed to correct himself, because a duke's instinct was still command. It is a courtesy due to your aunt. The permission I ask is yours. Hester looked toward the doorway, where Lady Pamela waited, pale with contained alarm. Beyond her, Blanche stood with Sir Piers Nettleby, whose expression was pleasant, narrow, and watchful. He leaned close to his sister, and Hester could not hear the words, but she saw Blanche's answer. One glance at Hester's reticule, one glance at Clement. Then her mouth moved. She kept it. Hester felt cold pass under her skin. Clement saw the direction of her gaze, but not, she thought, the shape of the words. Not yet. Good. Let him not know too soon. Let no one know before truth had a place to stand. She looked back at him. You may call, Your Grace. His breath altered, almost invisibly. Thank you. Do not thank me. I have promised you nothing except a door that may close. Then I shall endeavor not to deserve its closing. It was almost the right answer. That made it dangerous. Hester left him beside the rose tapers and walked toward her aunt, without lowering her head. Behind her, the flames burned evenly along the silver line, each one upright, each one watched. Yet as she crossed into the next room, she understood that the evening had not restored her. It had reopened the case. Somewhere inside Lady Arkwright's bright house, the past had stirred. Somewhere behind Blanche Nettleby's soft smile, a hidden fear had shown its face. And somewhere in Clement Vale's careful silence, the Duke of Tillingham had begun, far too late, to doubt the darkness he had once believed. By noon the next day, the Duke of Tillingham had read the same letter 11 times and found, on the 11th reading, that hatred was less useful than shame. Clement stood alone in the library of his London house, where the curtains had been half drawn against the pale May sun, and the air still held the cold discipline of rooms kept by servants who knew their master preferred silence. On the desk before him lay a narrow folded note, yellowed slightly at the edges, its seal long broken, its words as poisonous as they had been the first night he had received them. Your Grace, you should know, Lady Hester Wrenford has boasted that before the season ends, you will have no choice but to offer for her. She says a duke's pride is easiest to guide when the candles are low. There was no signature, only the initials H.W., written below in a hand that imitated delicacy and achieved malice. A year ago, Clement had read those lines while the memory of Hester's face was still warm in him. He had stood in a corridor outside Lady Arkwright's supper room, with confusion behind him, with guests murmuring over extinguished tapers, with a footman bowing. and saying the note had been pressed upon him urgently. Clement had been 33 then, old enough to know better, and proud enough to do worse. He had believed the paper because believing it spared him a harder terror. He had been falling in love with a woman who had not flattered him, had not hunted him, had not seemed dazzled by the title that made everyone else either cautious or hungry, that had unsettled him more than any scheme could have done. So, when the note came, he had taken offence like a shield. He had put on the face of the Duke before the man could be wounded. He had passed Hester in that supper room without asking a single question. Last night she had stood beneath the rose tapers with the remnant of that same evening in her hand, and the room had gone silent around the very wound he had left unexamined. Clement lowered the note to the desk. "Fool," he said softly. The word did not echo. The library was too heavily furnished for echoes. His late father's portrait stared down from above the mantel, all command and no confession. Clement looked back at it without flinching. He had been trained, since boyhood, never to explain himself when authority would suffice. A duke did not chase whispers. A duke did not plead for understanding. A duke did not expose uncertainty to a room that would make entertainment of it by supper. That training had made him powerful. It had also made him cruel. A knock sounded. "Come," Clement said. His valet, March, entered with the controlled discretion of a man who had dressed 3 generations of veiled pride and knew when not to comment on its collapse. Behind him came Mr. Selborne, Clement's solicitor, spare, grey-haired, and carrying a leather portfolio that had survived more family catastrophes than most families admitted having. Selborne bowed. "Your Grace sent word that the matter was urgent. It was urgent a year ago. I chose to be slow." Selborne's eyes moved once toward the note, then back to Clement. "I understand. You do not, but you may soon." Clement gestured to the desk. "Read it." Selborne took the note with clean fingers and a lawyer's absence of expression. March remained by the door, quiet as carved oak. As Selborne read, Clement turned toward the window, where Mayfair continued behaving as if every reputation were not a fragile object passed from hand to careless hand. Carriages rolled along the street. A flower girl called Violets at the corner. Somewhere not far away, Hester Wrenford was enduring her aunt's instructions, perhaps being told that last night must not signify anything. Clement had asked permission to call upon Lady Pamela, but the permission that mattered had been Hester's. "You may call, Your Grace. Not welcome, not forgiveness. Only a door that may close." Selborne laid the note down. "This is not in Lady Hester's hand." Clement turned sharply. "You know her hand? I have seen subscription lists from last year's Naval Widows Fund. Lady Hester copied several donor names when Lady Arkwright's secretary fell ill. Her script is firmer than this, less ornamental. Whoever wrote this believed men find loops convincing." The words struck Clement with unreasonable force. One practical observation had done what his conscience had circled all morning. It opened the floor beneath the old certainty. "You will obtain those subscription pages." "Yes, Your Grace, quietly, of course." Clement picked up the note again. "The paper." Selborne examined it near the light. "Good quality, not the finest. The edge appears trimmed by hand. See here this slight wavering. A lady's desk knife could do it, though not necessarily a lady's hand. The note was given to me by a footman in Lady Arkwright's corridor after several candles went out in the supper room." Selborne's gaze sharpened. "Several at once. Yes, a small confusion. Nothing dramatic enough to remark upon then. Enough to send ladies laughing and servants hurrying with tapers. I remember a scent of rose wax and bayberry. I remember Lady Hester near the sideboard. He stopped. Hester waiting. Hester looking toward the door. Hester's face as he passed her. Not angry. Not yet. Only stunned by a blow that had not explained itself. I need the footman found. After a year, that may be difficult. Then begin with Lady Arkwright's steward. Staff books, wages, dismissals. Anyone serving supper that night. Anyone borrowed from another house. Selborne made notes. And the candle supplier? Yes. Rose-coloured beeswax tapers. Lady Arkwright said last night, they do not match from year to year. I want to know who ordered them in May 1815, and whether any other household ordered the same shade. You suspect the candles mattered? Clement looked at the old note. I suspect darkness mattered. March, who had not moved, spoke with hesitation. Your Grace, may I say something? Clement turned. March had never asked such a thing lightly. Say it. That night, when you returned home from Lady Arkwright's, your evening gloves smelled strongly of smoke and rose wax. I remember because you ordered them thrown away. Clement went still. I ordered that. Yes, Your Grace. You said the scent was offensive. The library seemed to narrow, not because of the fact itself, but because of what it revealed. He had not merely believed the lie. He had tried to rid himself of every trace of the room where he had chosen it. Did you throw them away? No, Your Grace. March's face remained solemn. The gloves were new. And I was trained under your father's valet never to waste good leather, because a gentleman has taken a dislike to his own evening. They are in the cedar drawer with damaged articles. Selborne's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Clement almost laughed. It would have been a bitter sound, and he spared them all. Bring them. March left and returned within minutes with a folded cloth. Inside lay pale evening gloves, faintly discolored at the fingertips. Clement did not touch them at first. He could see, even before Selborne bent near, a smudge of dark soot along the right thumb, and a tiny crescent of hardened rosewax near the cuff seam. He remembered lifting his hand last night to shield Hester's taper. The instinct had come before thought, old as regret. A year ago, perhaps that same hand had brushed some object in the dark, some snuffer, some candlestick, some evidence he had not known enough to preserve. Selborne studied the glove. This may prove only that your Grace was near the candles. It proves I was there, Clement said. It proves I had senses and chose not to use them. Selborne closed his portfolio. I will begin at once. The steward, the candle supplier, the staff books, the subscription pages, and any servant attached to the corridor where the note changed hands. Not changed, Clement said. Delivered. We do not yet know it was changed. No, Your Grace. We do not yet know. The correction mattered. Clement had destroyed enough by mistaking suspicion for truth. He would not now commit the same sin in reverse, even for Hester's sake. After Selborne departed, Clement sat at the desk and drew a sheet of paper toward him. He wrote Lady Hester, then stopped. The address looked too intimate. He wrote Lady Hester Wrenford, then stopped again, because formality, from him, might now seem cowardice, dressed as respect. He dipped the pen and forced himself onward. I ask your permission to explain. No. Too late. I ask your forgiveness. Worse, he had no right to ask for what he had not earned. At last he wrote, I have begun to question what I should have questioned then. He stared at the line until the ink dulled. It was true. It was also selfish. It offered her the burden of his awakening, as though she had waited a year to encourage his conscience. He folded nothing, sealed nothing. The paper remained open on the desk, unsent. Your Grace, March asked quietly from the doorway. Clement looked up. Have no note delivered to Lady Hester. Yes, Your Grace. If I call tomorrow, it will be properly, through Lady Pamela's door. I will not make Lady Hester carry another private paper, because I once mishandled the first. March bowed, and for the first time in years, Clement saw approval flicker across his valet's guarded face. Across Mayfair, in the smaller drawing-room of Wrenford House, Hester stood before her aunt, and felt the old taper stub resting in the work-basket beside her like a forbidden pulse. Lady Pamela had been speaking for 10 minutes without saying the one thing that mattered. She had mentioned restraint, appearances, caution. The unfortunate sharpness of Hester's reply to the lady in blue satin, the Duke's unexpected courtesy, Lady Blanche's likely interpretation, and the necessity of not seeming eager. Hester listened until the words became lace without pattern. Then she said, "I will receive his grace if he calls." Lady Pamela stopped. "You will do no such thing without my guidance. I will receive him in your drawing-room, with you present, at a respectable hour, if he calls. That is guidance enough. You cannot afford pride." Hester looked at the woman who had taken her to Bath under the name of health, and returned her to London under the command to appear unaffected. Pride is not what remains when one has lost everything else. It is what prevents everything else from being taken. Lady Pamela flushed. "You speak as though you were wronged by this family." "I was hidden by this family, for your protection." "No, Aunt, for our convenience." The silence that followed was smaller than the silence at Lady Arkwright's, but it cost Hester more. Lady Pamela's face tightened with fear disguised as offence. "If you revive this scandal, I shall have no choice but to send you back to Bath." Hester picked up the taper stub and wrapped it once more in linen. Her hands remained steady. "Then I shall know. Bath was not prescribed for my health, after all." She left the drawing-room before her aunt could answer, not because she had won, but because she had finally said aloud what had been true for a year. In her bedchamber, with the door closed and the May light thinning across the carpet, Hester placed the taper inside her reticule. She did not know that Clement had reopened the old note. She did not know that a solicitor was already seeking a footman, a steward, a candle supplier, and a servant's memory of a darkened room. She knew only that the Duke had seen the taper and remembered. That was not justice. It was not even apology. But somewhere beyond her window, the machinery of a truth, long delayed, had begun to move, and for the first time since the candles went out, Hester allowed herself to wonder who had wanted darkness badly enough to make a duke believe it. Lady Blanche Nettleby arrived at Wrenford House on the 4th morning after the subscription supper, with a basket of forced lilies, a face arranged for compassion, and the unmistakable confidence of a woman who had never entered a room without first deciding how she wished to be remembered in it. Hester saw her from the upper landing before the footman announced her, pale silk, moving beneath a spencer of spring green, one gloved hand resting lightly on the stair rail as if the house itself had offered support. Lady Pamela, who had been pretending not to wait for callers all morning, became instantly alert. A visit from Lady Blanche could not be refused without creating exactly the sort of speculation. Lady Pamela feared more than illness, poverty, or truth. "You will be gracious," she whispered as Hester descended. "I will be civil," Hester said. "Do not split hairs with me. Then, do not hand me a knife." Lady Pamela's eyes sharpened, but the drawing-room door opened before she could answer. Blanche rose from the sofa in a cloud of lilies and concern. "My dear Lady Hester, I hope I do not intrude. I have thought of you so often since Lady Arkwright's supper. Hester doubted that Blanche had thought of anything else. How kind. You looked so composed, Blanche said, pressing Hester's fingers for precisely the time required by affection, and not 1 instant longer. One hears such foolish remarks in crowded rooms. I told Sir Piers only yesterday that society can be cruelest to women who have done nothing but appear where others once expected them not to appear. Lady Pamela gave a nervous laugh. London is all exaggeration, indeed. A candle gutters, a whisper runs along a table, and by morning everyone insists there was a drama. Blanche smiled, when there was only poor lighting. Hester took the chair opposite her. She felt rather than saw Lady Pamela's warning glance. On the small work table beside the hearth lay Hester's basket with mending silk, a folded handkerchief, and beneath it, not hidden well enough, the linen square that held the rose-coloured taper stub. Hester had placed it there after comparing the wax again in the morning light, telling herself the shade difference meant nothing. Blanche's gaze found it as naturally as a needle finds cloth. For 1 fraction of a breath, her expression emptied. Not alarm, not guilt. Recognition. Then the smile returned, smoother for having almost slipped. Hester's pulse became very quiet. Blanche reached toward the lilies and lifted 1 white bloom. I brought these because rose tapers seemed too pointed a gift after the other evening. Though I confess the colour was charming. Did Lady Arkwright say where she obtained them? No, Hester said. I did not ask. How wise. Some questions lead only to old dust. Or old rooms, Hester replied. Blanche tilted her head. You have grown sharper in Bath. No, only less willing to bleed politely. Lady Pamela made a small sound. Blanche's eyes warmed with something that was not warmth. I hope you do not think me your enemy, Lady Hester. Last year was unfortunate for everyone. His Grace is a proud man. Proud men are easily offended when a lady appears to expect what has not been offered. Hester looked at the linen square. Blanche's eyes had gone there again, and this time Hester let her notice that she noticed. Did I appear to expect something? I only mean that people misunderstood. People often do when it suits them. Before Blanche could answer, the footman entered with a silver salver. On it lay a card. Lady Pamela took it, read, and went pale in the controlled manner of women who believed colour in the face was a social failure. His Grace, the Duke of Tillingham. Blanche's fingers tightened around the lily stem until a faint green stain marked her glove. Hester stood. She had agreed he might call. Still, consent in theory had not prepared her body for the sound of his title in her aunt's house. Clement entered with a formality that preserved every rule and somehow made the room feel less safe for liars. He bowed first to Lady Pamela, then to Blanche, then to Hester. Not too deeply, not too warmly, nothing society could seize. Yet his eyes found hers with the weight of a question he had no right to ask aloud. Lady Pamela, Lady Blanche, Lady Hester. Your Grace, Lady Pamela said, as if swallowing a pin. This is unexpected. I sent my card yesterday evening. Yes, of course. I meant only that your time is so greatly claimed. Some claims should have been honoured sooner. The sentence rested in the room. Blanche's fan opened with a soft breath of silk. How noble of you to revive old friendships, Your Grace. London has so few true examples of loyalty. Clement looked at her. I am not certain loyalty can be revived. It may only be proven after having failed. Lady Pamela's eyes widened. Hester did not move. She could feel the linen-wrapped taper on the work table as though it emitted heat. Clement had come, not with charm, not with ease, not with the polished indifference that had once allowed him to wound without spectacle. He had brought danger because he had brought humility into a room built for appearances. Lady Pamela gestured for tea because no English household catastrophe was allowed to proceed without it. The footman carried in a tray with porcelain cups a small dish of lemon slices and a narrow silver candle tray that had been moved from the mantel to make room. Hester stepped forward to clear the work table before the tray could be placed there. Clement moved at the same moment, reaching for the linen square that had slipped toward the edge. "Allow me," he said. "No," Hester said softly. The word stopped him more completely than a hand could have done. He withdrew at once. Then, because the footman hovered, and Lady Pamela looked ready to faint from impropriety, Hester lifted the linen-wrapped taper herself and set it upon the silver candle tray. Clement's gloved hand came down to steady the tray at the same instant. Their gloves brushed, barely, a touch through kid leather, less than a second, no more intimate than any accidental contact in a crowded drawing room. Yet it struck Hester with the memory of flame, of his hand shielding light, of all the things a hand could do, and all the things it had not done. She pulled back first. Clement did not follow. That mattered. It should not have mattered as much as it did. Blanche watched them with eyes like blue glass. Clement noticed the wrapped taper on the tray, then looked away, deliberately granting Hester ownership of the object. "Lady Hester," he said, "I came to ask permission to speak of May last year." Lady Pamela sat too quickly. "Surely there is no need to disturb settled matters." "They were not settled," Hester said. Her aunt looked at her as if betrayal could occur within one's own family by means of an accurate sentence. Clement inclined his head. "Nor were they honestly examined." Blanche's smile thinned. "How grave this sounds. I had not realized a few extinguished candles required inquiry by a duke." "Nor had I," Clement said. "That was my first error." The room went very still. Hester felt the words approach her and stop short of demanding anything. He was not asking her to comfort him for having discovered his conscience. He was naming a fault and leaving it where he stood. "What do you wish from me?" she asked. "Not forgiveness." His answer came at once, and the quickness of it unsettled her. "Not yet, perhaps not ever. I wish permission to learn what I refuse to learn." Lady Pamela whispered, "Hester, this is most irregular." "No," Hester said, "it is late." Clement's gaze lowered, accepting the blow. Blanche rose lightly, as if the scene had become tedious rather than dangerous. "I fear I must leave you to your memories. Lady Pamela, thank you for receiving me. Lady Hester, do take care. Old flames are notorious for smoking when stirred." Hester looked up. "Only if someone smothers them badly." For a moment, Blanche's composure cracked again. There it was, swift and bright as a pin under candlelight. Fear. Then she curtsied, and left with her lilies, her sweetness, and the scent of something beginning to rot beneath both. When the door closed, Lady Pamela began at once. "This cannot continue." Clement turned to her with perfect courtesy. "I will not remain if Lady Hester asks me to go." It was clever, Hester thought, but not manipulative. He had placed the choice where it belonged, and that made refusing him both easier and harder. "You may remain for 5 minutes," she said, "with my aunt present." "Thank you." "Do not thank me. Speak." Clement drew a breath. He looked like a man standing before a locked chapel door, uncertain whether prayer or confession would be more unwelcome. "A note was given to me that night. It claimed you intended to force my hand. I believed it without asking you. I reopened it yesterday. My solicitor does not believe the handwriting is yours." Hester felt the room tilt, though nothing moved. For a year, she had imagined many reasons for his abandonment. Pride, boredom, cowardice, another woman. She had not imagined a piece of paper speaking in her stolen name. "You believed I would do that?" Her voice was calm. The calm hurt worse than anger. Clement did not protect himself. Yes, Lady Pamela's hand flew to her throat. "Your Grace, surely there were circumstances. There was paper, there was darkness, there was my pride. Those were the circumstances." Hester looked toward the tray, where the taper lay wrapped, no longer hidden. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt younger by a year, standing in a supper room while a man who had made her feel seen decided she was a scheme. "You chose not to ask when truth was still warm," she said. Clement flinched. A small movement. "Enough, yes. Then I will not give it to you cold simply because you have developed an appetite for it." Lady Pamela gasped. Clement bowed his head. "That is just. Justice would have been asking me then. Yes, no defense, no noble excuse, no injured dignity. It made him harder to hate and therefore more dangerous." Hester gathered the linen-wrapped taper from the tray and placed it back in her work-basket. "Your 5 minutes are over." Clement bowed. "Then I will go." At the door, he paused only long enough to say, "I do not deserve your trust. I mean to become a man who can ask for it." He left before she could answer. Lady Pamela began speaking the instant the door closed. But Hester did not hear the words. Through the window, beyond the railings, she saw Clement descend the steps to his carriage without looking back. Across the street, half concealed by a waiting hackney, Lady Blanche Nettleby stood with Sir Piers. Piers leaned close, his face sharp with displeasure. Blanche's gloved hand closed around the stem of the last lily until it snapped. Hester watched her mouth form words she could not hear, yet she knew, with sudden certainty, that Blanche had not come to offer sympathy. She had come to see whether the taper still existed, and now she knew. That evening, in the Nettleby lodging near Brook Street, Blanche threw the broken lily into the grate and said, "She has kept it, and he has begun to ask questions." Sir Piers Nettleby looked up from a stack of unpaid bills, his handsome face tightening into calculation. "Then make her look dangerous before he finds what matters." The note, no notes can be denied. He tapped one long finger against the table. The snuffer. If the true one is found, the wax may still be under the lip. Blanche stared at the fire, and the flames showed fear at last. "Then we shall give them a snuffer," she said, "just not the one they need." By the 8th evening after Lady Arkwright's supper, the story had changed shape in London's mouth so often that Hester could no longer recognize the wound by its original outline. It had begun a year ago as pity, then presumption, then failed ambition. Now, as Lady Pamela's carriage drew up before a narrow-fronted Mayfair house bright with music and lamps, the whisper had sharpened into something more useful to cruelty. A lady might survive being pitied. She might even survive being thought foolish. But a woman accused of arranging darkness to corner a duke was offered no place to stand. "You need not enter," Lady Pamela said, though her voice held none of the tenderness those words should have carried. "I can say you developed a headache." Hester looked through the carriage window at the open doorway where candlelight spilled across the steps and a footman accepted cards with the solemnity of a man admitting witnesses. "If I stay away, they will say I could not face the room. If you enter, they may say worse. They have already said worse." Lady Pamela's fingers worked over the clasp of her reticule, then let his grace answer it. "A duke's denial has weight." Hester turned to her aunt. The carriage lamp softened Lady Pamela's anxious face, making fear look almost like concern. And what would his denial make me? Innocent because he permits it. Do not be theatrical. I am trying very hard not to be invisible. Lady Pamela had no answer for that, or perhaps she had too many and knew none would be kind. The footman opened the carriage door. Hester stepped down into the mild night, with her spine straight, her grey silk cloak gathered close, and the rose-coloured taper stub wrapped in linen inside her reticule. She had not meant to bring it. Yet leaving it behind had felt like abandoning the only witness that had stayed with her when everyone else preferred convenience. The musicale had already begun. A young soprano stood beside the pianoforte in the front drawing-room, singing a delicate Italian air to a company more interested in scandal than music. The supper room beyond was arranged with small tables, white cloths, low bowls of hothouse flowers, and candles placed carefully enough to prove the hostess had heard every rumor and feared repetition. Hester felt the glances before she heard the whispers. They moved over her like cold pins. There she is. She came. How bold, how desperate. Lady Blanche Nettleby stood near the archway in blue silk, a colour too pure to be accidental, with Sir Piers at her shoulder, and a circle of women tilted toward her, like flowers toward a poisonous sun. Blanche did not immediately look at Hester. That was her art. She allowed others to notice first, then seemed to discover the situation with graceful regret. "Lady Hester," she said softly, when Hester approached the supper-room. "How brave of you to join us." "Bravery is often named by people who arranged the danger," Hester answered. The women around Blanche went still. Sir Piers smiled with his lips and nothing else. That is a severe thought for so musical an evening. Music improves when one hears the undertone. Blanche's eyes gleamed. Then perhaps you will appreciate this evening's little puzzle. A note has been found among the supper cards. Most improper. I begged our hostess not to mention it, but you know how households are. Papers travel. Hester's skin cooled. Across the room, a maid stood near the sideboard, with a folded sheet on a tray, pale and frightened beneath her cap. Clement Vale entered before Hester could ask a question. No announcement was needed this time. The room felt him before it acknowledged him. Conversations narrowed. Men shifted aside. The soprano faltered for half a note and recovered. Clement's gaze found Hester first. It moved quickly to Blanche, then to the tray in the maid's trembling hands. He understood danger, if not its shape. He came toward them with restrained purpose. "Lady Hester," he said. "Lady Blanche." "Sir Piers." "Your Grace," Blanche murmured. "How fortunate. Perhaps you can resolve what must surely be a misunderstanding." Clement did not look away from the folded paper. Misunderstandings are best resolved before they become performances. How very wise. Blanche lifted the note from the tray with 2 fingers, as if reluctant to touch vulgarity. This was discovered tucked beneath one of the supper-room candlesticks. "It appears to be addressed to you." Clement held out his hand. Blanche did not give it to him. She unfolded it aloud. "Your Grace, when the candles are lowered, come to the small supper-room. No one will see us long enough to object." A sound passed through the guests, soft and avid. Lady Pamela gripped the back of a chair. Hester stood so still that the room mistook her control for shock. In truth, something inside her had gone past shock into a clean, cold clarity. The initials were not proof. The language was not hers. The method was not new. Someone had learned that darkness could be useful once and had decided to use it again. Clement stepped forward. His face had gone hard enough to silence lesser accusations, but Hester saw the old danger in him. not doubt, not of her, a different error, the instinct to end the insult by force of rank, to make the room obey him and call that justice. No accusation, he said, each word quiet, will be treated as fact without witness and evidence. Blanche's fan opened. Of course, Your Grace. No one accuses Lady Hester. We only observe a distressing pattern. A pattern requires more than repetition by the same mouth, Hester said. Blanche's smile sharpened. My dear Lady Hester, I'm trying to spare you. These situations do cling to a lady. Last year, the candles. This year, another note near the candles. One begins to wonder whether you are pursued by coincidence. One begins to wonder who keeps arranging the candles. The words left Hester before fear could soften them. The supper room tightened. Clement turned toward her, not to stop her, not this time. Hester felt his attention settle beside her like a wall she had not asked for and did not entirely resent. The hostess, a thin woman with pearls at her throat and terror in her eyes, whispered, Perhaps Lady Hester would prefer to withdraw. Lady Pamela seized on it. Yes, perhaps that would be best. Hester looked at the folded note in Blanche's hand. No, I would prefer that the person who placed that note beneath a candlestick explain why a lady's reputation is always expected to leave the room before the evidence does. Sir Piers gave a small laugh. Evidence? It is only a foolish paper. Then why present it before half of Mayfair? His expression cooled. Blanche answered for him, because secrecy has not served anyone well in this matter. Clement's gaze cut to her. At last, Lady Blanche, we agree. Hester heard something in his tone that told her he had begun, in the guarded chambers of his own mind, to connect last year's darkness with tonight's spectacle. He did not yet know enough. Neither did she. But suspicion had entered the room, and it had chosen a chair. Blanche seemed to sense it. She folded the note and held it toward Clement. Then take it, Your Grace. Judge for yourself. He did not take it. Instead, he looked at Hester. The choice passed silently to her. It was a small thing. It was enormous. He could have seized the paper, crushed the accusation, commanded obedience. He waited. Hester extended her gloved hand. Blanche hesitated. Surely this is more properly His Grace's concern. My initials are on it, Hester said. My name is being fed to the room. That makes it mine. Blanche laid the paper in her hand. Hester did not unfold it. She held it as one might hold a dead insect found in a teacup. I will not be convicted by a room that prefers darkness to questions. The words struck silence from the walls. Hester turned to the hostess and curtsied. Thank you for the music. I find I need air. Lady Pamela whispered her name in panic, but Hester was already moving. She did not flee. She crossed the supper room at a measured pace, every step refusing the role of exposed schemer, abandoned lady, desperate woman, or grateful object of ducal rescue. Behind her, Clement's boots sounded once, then stopped. She knew without turning that he had followed only as far as propriety allowed. That restraint reached her more painfully than pursuit would have done. In the vestibule, the night air entered through the open door and touched her face. Her hand trembled only after she was out of the room. The forged note crackled between her fingers. Clement's voice came from several feet behind her, low enough not to carry. Lady Hester, she did not look back. Do not defend me with thunder, Your Grace. It will only teach them to fear your weather and not their own lies. A pause. Then, softer, I know. She heard cloth move. He had removed his cloak. For one breath she thought he would place it over her shoulders, and every wounded part of her prepared to refuse him. But he did not. He held it out where she could see it, an offering, not an assumption. The night has cooled, he said. You may take it or leave it, and I won't step closer." Hester looked at the cloak, then at him. Candlelight from the doorway cut along his face, showing not pride now, but discipline under strain. He wanted to protect her. He was trying to learn how not to make protection another form of possession. She did not take the cloak, not yet. But she did not move away. "Find who trimmed the paper," she said. "I have already asked Selborne to examine the old note. Then give him this one." She held it out. Their fingers did not touch. Clement accepted the paper with the care of a man receiving evidence, not intimacy. "I will, and if you discover the truth, do not bury it because you think silence is kinder." His eyes met hers. "I have mistaken silence for control before. I won't do it again if I can help it." "If you can help it?" "No," he said, and the correction cost him. "I won't do it again." Lady Pamela appeared behind them, pale with distress. Hester stepped past Clement and into the waiting carriage without assistance. Only when the door closed did she let her breath leave her. Through the window, she saw him standing beneath the lamps, with the forged note in his hand and his cloak still over his arm, unused. In the supper room behind him, voices had already begun rebuilding the scandal. But something had changed. Last year, Hester had left a room with only a dying taper and no one willing to question the dark. Tonight, the darkness had followed her out, carrying proof of its own manufacture, and for the first time, Clement Vale was holding it. The rumor reached Clement before breakfast and Hester before tea, which meant London had already digested it into something uglier by luncheon. A lady's maid heard it from a milliner's girl, who had heard it from a footman outside the music ale house, who had improved the tale by the time it travelled through 3 kitchens and 1 linen closet. Lady Hester Wrenford, it was said, had carried a private note in her glove. Lady Hester had pretended outrage when discovered. Lady Hester had once contrived a darkened supper room, and, finding that effort unsuccessful, had attempted the same game twice. By 11 o'clock, a gentleman at White's had laughed that the Duke of Tillingham seemed an expensive candle to keep trying to snuff. By noon, Clement had left the club without touching the coffee placed before him. By 1, Mr. Selborne stood in Clement's library, with both notes on the desk between them. The old one from May 1815, and the new one Hester had placed into Clement's keeping the night before. The paper edges did not match perfectly, but they were cousins. Both had been trimmed after folding. Both bore a slight wavering along the lower margin, as if the blade had caught in the grain. "Nettleby stationery box," Selborne said. "I would not yet swear to it before a magistrate. I would say so privately with confidence." Clement looked at the second note until the initials blurred. H.W. 2 letters had done what a pistol could not have done in a civilized room. They had wounded a woman without requiring anyone to raise a hand. "How many copies?" he asked. Selborne's expression did not change, but caution entered his voice. "Of the newer note, of the rumor. That is harder to count. Count the papers that might print it. Count the gossip sheets. Count the men who will sell a line if paid to forget where they heard it." Selborne closed the leather portfolio slowly. "Your Grace wishes the matter suppressed." Clement heard the word and disliked it. Then he disliked himself more because the word was accurate. Since dawn, he had imagined swift containment, money to silence printers, pressure on hosts to refuse discussion, quiet purchase of any copied note, a private inquiry conducted so thoroughly that by the time truth emerged, no one would remember the shape of the accusation. It had seemed merciful in the early morning. Hester had left the music ale pale but upright, refusing his cloak, refusing his thunder, refusing to be carried out beneath the banner of his protection. He had watched her carriage depart with the forged note in his hand and fury under his ribs. Fury wanted action. Action wanted control. Control was the oldest language he spoke. If the paper is not seen again, Clement said, it cannot be used to feed another room. Perhaps. Selborne's eyes lifted. A hidden accusation does not become innocence. It becomes a closed door people continue to point at. Clement went still. He did not enjoy being taught by his solicitor. But he paid the man partly for intelligence and partly for the courage to use it. You think I am wrong. I think Lady Hester may think so. That was worse. Clement turned toward the window. Outside, the square moved in elegant ignorance. A groom led a glossy horse along the railings. A girl in a straw bonnet carried parcels tied with blue string. The world continued to arrange itself around ordinary errands, while Hester's name was being handled like a spill one could wipe away. I will not let them tear her apart while I collect perfect proof. Selborne's voice softened by 1 degree. No, Your Grace, but take care that you do not preserve her reputation by removing her from the room where it was damaged. Clement said nothing. Silence again. Always silence offering itself as strength. Always control disguising fear. That afternoon, at Wrenford House, Hester learned of Clement's plan from the person least suited to deliver it kindly. Lady Pamela entered the small morning room with a note from a mutual acquaintance and a face bright with terrified hope. Hester was seated by the window, mending a torn seam in one of her gloves. Her reticule lay on the table beside her. Inside it, the rose taper stub remained wrapped and still. His Grace means to manage the matter, Lady Pamela announced. It is the best possible outcome. Hester did not look up at once. The needle passed through kid leather, neat and sure. What matter? The note, the talk, all of it. Lady Marston writes that the Duke's people have already spoken to 2 printers. He means to prevent any vulgar publication. Perhaps he will obtain the copies and have them destroyed. We may yet be spared a true scandal. Hester drew the thread through too sharply. It snapped. For a moment she only looked at the broken end lying against her glove. Spared, she said. Yes, you see, I told you a duke's influence has weight. If His Grace chooses to hush the matter, society will follow. No, Aunt. Society will whisper softer. Lady Pamela frowned. That is an improvement. For whom? For all of us. There it was, the family crest beneath every argument. Not Hester's peace, not truth. All of us. The house, the name, the drawing-room invitations, the cousins who would prefer that Lady Hester Wrenford be remembered as delicate rather than inconveniently wronged. Hester set the glove aside. Send a card to His Grace. Lady Pamela blinked. Absolutely not. Then I shall send one myself. You will not summon a duke like a clerk. I will ask whether he intends to bury evidence bearing my initials without my consent. Lady Pamela rose so quickly, the chair legs scraped. You are being reckless. This is precisely why gentlemen do not consult ladies on matters of reputation. Feeling clouds judgment. Hester stood too. Not quickly. That would have granted anger the victory of appearing uncontrolled. Feeling did not place forged initials on a note. Feeling did not make a room believe them. Feeling did not abandon a woman for a year because asking the truth was uncomfortable. Hester. No, I have been managed by concern, by propriety, by health, by family convenience, and now perhaps by ducal influence. I will not live as a rumor managed by a duke. The words seemed to strike the walls before they reached Lady Pamela. Her aunt's face tightened. If you force this into the open, You may not be able to return to Bath under my protection." Hester looked at the reticule, then at the window beyond which Mayfair went on counting invitations as though dignity were a social appointment. "Then I shall know I was never protected, only stored." Clement arrived less than 2 hours later, not because Lady Pamela had invited him gladly, but because Hester's card had been written in a hand steady enough to alarm anyone who understood women. The drawing-room had never seemed smaller. Lady Pamela sat near the tea-table, rigid with disapproval. Hester stood by the mantel. She did not offer him tea. He did not expect it. He entered, bowed, and paused several feet from her, far enough that no one could invent intimacy, near enough that evasion would be impossible. "Lady Hester." "Your Grace." The old formality had become a battlefield where neither side moved without consequence. Clement glanced once at Lady Pamela. "You wished to speak." "I wish to ask whether you intend to purchase silence on my behalf." He took the blow without visible retreat. "I intended to prevent further injury. By destroying the evidence, by preventing a lie from multiplying, a lie already multiplied last year. No one needed to print it. They only needed your silence." The room changed. Lady Pamela made a faint protest, but Clement lifted one hand, not to silence Hester, but to stop interruption. He caught himself halfway and lowered it. Hester saw the correction. It mattered. It did not absolve. "You are right," he said. Lady Pamela stared at him as if no duke in English history had ever admitted such a thing in a drawing-room. Hester felt no triumph. She felt tired, and beneath the tiredness, furious that honesty from him could still reach her. "If you buy the notes," she said, "if you frighten the printers, if you persuade every hostess to call the matter indelicate and move on, what remains? A stain no one names, a silence everyone understands. I have lived inside that once. I won't do it again. I thought to spare you another public wound. You thought to choose the shape of my wound for me." His face tightened. There, not anger, recognition. "Yes," the word was quiet. It did not seek mercy. "Yes, I did." Hester had expected argument, some polished defense about rank, influence, masculine duty, the necessity of acting quickly in a world where women paid for every hour of hesitation. Instead, he gave her agreement, and for a heartbeat she hated him for making anger stumble. "Then do not." Clement looked at her, and the room seemed to draw in around the space between them. "I will not bury what wounded you," Lady Pamela whispered. "Your Grace, surely there are gentler methods." Clement did not look away from Hester. Gentleness that leaves a lie alive is only cowardice with softer manners. Hester's fingers curled against the mantel edge. No touch was permitted in this part of the story between them. The harm was still awake. Yet something passed across the distance that felt more dangerous than touch because it required no permission and could not be visibly refused. He had understood, not fully, not enough, but the wall had cracked where she had struck it. "What will you do?" she asked. "What you asked, I will look for the true snuffer. I will have Selborne trace the blade mark on the note, the candle orders, and every servant who stood near Lady Arkwright's supper room last year. I will not destroy a single paper without your knowledge. And when there is proof fit to stand in public, it will stand where the lie stood." Hester looked down at the work table. The wrapped taper lay in her reticule, unseen but present. "And if there is no proof," Clement's voice lowered, "then my public apology will have to stand without it." Lady Pamela went pale. "That would ruin you." "No," Clement said, "it would inconvenience me. There is a difference. I should have learned it before Lady Hester paid the price." Hester could not answer at once. A year ago, such words would have undone her. Now they entered more slowly, tested by scars before being admitted. She did not trust him. She did not forgive him. But she believed in that moment that he had stopped trying to make silence look like kindness. "Very well," she said. "Find the snuffer." Clement bowed. "I will. And your grace?" He paused at the door. "Yes, if you are tempted to protect me by hiding me again, remember that I am not a taper to be shielded from every draught." His gaze held hers, dark with something like pain and something stronger than regret. "No," he said. "You are the flame I should have trusted to survive it." He left before Lady Pamela could decide whether the sentence was improper. Hester remained by the mantel until the carriage wheels faded. She did not lift the taper from her reticule. She did not need to see it. For the first time since the musicale, the object did not feel like the last remnant of an extinguished hope. It felt like a small, stubborn witness waiting for the room, where truth would finally be allowed to breathe. Clement came to Wrenford House on the 11th day after Hester's return to London, with Mr. Selborne at his side, not behind him like a weapon, and not before him like a shield. That was the first thing Hester noticed from the drawing-room window when the carriage stopped below. The second was that Clement looked tired, in a way no tailor could correct. His coat was immaculate, his gloves clean, his hat carried at the proper angle by the footman who admitted him. Yet fatigue had settled around his eyes and mouth like a truth refusing powder and polish. Hester told herself not to be moved by it. Men could look remorseful after doing harm and still expect women to mistake remorse for repair. On the table near her chair lay her work-basket, and inside it, wrapped in linen beneath a folded handkerchief, rested the rose-colored taper stub. She had left it there deliberately, not hidden, not displayed, present as she meant to be. Lady Pamela sat near the tea service with her spine so stiff she might have been braced with whalebone from neck to conscience. "This is excessive," she whispered before the footman opened the door. "A duke, a solicitor, and old candle stories. We shall be talked about until Michaelmas." "We have been talked about for a year," Hester said. "This time we may at least deserve accuracy." Lady Pamela had no chance to answer. Clement entered, bowed, and waited until Mr. Selborne had made his own formal greeting. There was no presumption in the pause. He did not take the nearest chair because his rank allowed it. He did not address Lady Pamela first to turn Hester into a subject under discussion. He looked to Hester and said, "Lady Hester, thank you for receiving us." "My aunt received you," Hester said. "I allowed the door to remain open. Then I am grateful for the distinction." Lady Pamela poured tea too quickly. A spoon struck porcelain with a bright, nervous ring. Mr. Selborne accepted a cup and set it down untouched. He was a narrow, careful man with observant grey eyes and the air of one who trusted paper less than people imagined solicitors did. Clement remained standing until Hester sat, then took the chair opposite her, far enough for propriety, near enough that retreat would look like cowardice. For a moment no one spoke. Outside, a carriage passed over the stones. Inside, Hester could hear the small, steady tick of the mantel clock, measuring the cost of delayed truth. Clement placed a folded packet on the table, but did not open it. "Before Mr. Selborne speaks, I owe you words that are not evidence." Hester's gloved fingers closed once against her lap. Lady Pamela inhaled. "Your Grace, perhaps matters of feeling are best deferred until facts are established." "No," Clement said quietly. "That was one of my errors." The room stilled. He looked at Hester, not at her aunt, not at the solicitor, not at the packet. I believed a note, because believing it allowed me to be offended instead of afraid. I did not ask you whether it was true. I did not ask what you had endured in that room after I left it. Last week, when fresh lies began, I tried to buy silence, because command is easier for me than courage. I thought that was protection. It was erasure. I apologize for each of those choices, separately and without excuse. The apology did not heal her. It entered too cleanly for that, cutting through scar tissue rather than soothing it. Hester had imagined many speeches from him in the bitter theatre of sleepless nights. Some had been proud, some pleading, some romantically foolish enough to let her reject them with ease. This was worse because it asked nothing. He set the wrong down between them and did not decorate it. You speak as though naming an injury makes it smaller, she said. Clement bowed his head slightly. No. I speak because unnamed injuries are too often handed back to the wounded person to carry alone. Lady Pamela looked as if she would prefer an earthquake. Mr. Selborne's gaze lowered to his portfolio, granting the moment what privacy could exist in a chaperoned drawing room. Hester turned her face toward the window for one breath. Last year, she had wanted Clement to come back into the supper room and say that some mistake had occurred. She had wanted him to ask one honest question before the watching faces turned her into a lesson. She had wanted his attention because it had once made her feel visible. Now he was asking nothing but permission to see the wreckage clearly, and her heart, traitorous in its old education, recognized the difference. Say the facts, she said. Clement accepted the boundary at once. Mr. Selborne. The solicitor opened the packet. The old note and the newer note were trimmed by a similar hand, or at least with a similar hesitation. That alone proves little. However, a former stationer's assistant on Bond Street remembers repairing a portable writing box belonging to Sir Piers Nettleby last winter. The small desk knife had a nick near the point. Such a nick could produce a wavering cut along the lower edge of folded paper. Again, not proof enough by itself. Lady Pamela said faintly, "Must we discuss desk knives in a morning room?" "We must discuss whatever helped cut a lady's name into a lie," Hester replied. Mr. Selborne continued, "I have also spoken with Lady Arkwright's steward. The household inventory from May of last year notes a missing silver candle snuffer from the supper room after the evening in question. It was not an ordinary article, dented lip, engraved handle, older than the rest of the service. The steward assumed a servant had misplaced it and avoided reporting the loss to Lady Arkwright." Hester's eyes moved to Clement. "A snuffer," he nodded. "The night the candles went out, someone needed more than a draught." Memory opened, not gently. The supper room, rose tapers along the sideboard. A small confusion, several ladies laughing. A servant hurrying. Blanche near the candle table, pale silk sleeve close to the flames, one hand lifted as though to correct a smoking wick. Hester had not held that image because she had not known it mattered. Now it returned with the cruel brightness of something that had waited to be needed. Lady Blanche stood near the candle table, she said. Clement did not seize the statement. "You remember this? Not as evidence, as scenery. Scenery may become evidence when someone chose the stage carefully," Mr. Selborne said. Hester looked at the workbasket. The taper beneath the linen seemed suddenly less like a memory and more like a witness that had endured being underestimated. "And the snuffer? Still missing," Clement said. "But Mr. Selborne has found a retired candle-room maid, Mrs. Vale, who served Lady Arkwright then. She has sent word that she remembers wax inside the lip of the missing snuffer. Rose wax. Hester's breath changed despite herself. Lady Pamela set down her cup. "This is becoming grotesque." "No," Hester said softly now. "It is becoming particular." Clement's eyes warmed with recognition, not triumph. Yes, that single word carried more intimacy than flattery could have done, because it met her mind before it touched her pain. Hester rose, crossed to the work-basket, and drew out the linen-wrapped taper. She did not hand it to him. She laid it on the table between them and unfolded the cloth herself. The stub rested there, small and dark at the wick. Its rose color deepened with age. Mr. Selborne leaned forward but did not touch it. Clement looked at it as if it were both relic and accusation. "This was from that night?" he asked. "Yes, you kept it. Someone had to." His mouth tightened, but he did not ask her to soften the sentence. "May Mr. Selborne examine it?" Hester looked at the solicitor. He inclined his head. "Only visually for now, my lady, unless you permit more." "Visually, of course." That courtesy, so small, steadied her. Mr. Selborne observed the wax, the blackened thread, the faint discoloration near the base. If Mrs. Vale's memory is accurate, comparison may matter. Color, scent, composition, residue trapped under metal sometimes survives cleaning if the lip is dented. Lady Pamela pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. "And after that, do you intend to parade candle stubs before half of London?" Hester rapped the taper again. "If half of London was content to judge me by darkness, it may endure a little light." Clement's gaze fixed on her, and this time the silence between them did not feel like absence. It felt like a bridge not yet crossed. "Only if you want that," he said. "Not because I arrange it. Not because I believe it best. If this becomes public, it will be by your choice." Hester heard in those words the lesson she had forced upon him in anger. He had listened, not perfectly perhaps, not painlessly, but listened. Her fingers rested on the linen. "I want the truth restored where the lie was made." "Then that is what we pursue." He placed his gloved hand palm up on the table, not close enough to touch her, but close enough to make the offer unmistakable. The gesture stopped the room. Lady Pamela's eyes widened in scandalized alarm. Mr. Selborne suddenly discovered his notes. Hester looked at Clement's hand. Broad, still, disciplined. A hand that had once shielded a flame and later carried a lie. A hand that had nearly lifted to silence her and had lowered itself instead. This was not forgiveness. It was not surrender. It was a treaty written in the only language she could bear from him now. Choice. She placed the tips of her gloved fingers lightly against his. The contact was brief, restrained, and witnessed by too much mahogany and propriety to be called improper. Yet it shook something loose in her chest that had been frozen for a year. Clement did not close his hand over hers. He waited. Only when she gave the smallest pressure did he return it. No more than that. No claim. No victory. "I want to stand where you can refuse me," he said. Hester withdrew her hand before tenderness could become danger. "Then stand carefully." His eyes held hers. "I will." A knock came at the door before Lady Pamela could recover speech. The footman entered with a note for Mr. Selborne, delivered by a boy waiting below. The solicitor broke the seal, read quickly, and looked up. "Mrs. Vale will see us. She says she remembers the snuffer's dent. She remembers who borrowed it, and she remembers wax beneath the silver lip." The room went utterly still. Hester folded the taper back into linen and placed it in her reticule herself. Clement watched her do it, but made no move to assist. The object remained hers. The choice remained hers. For the first time, so did the next step. Mrs. Vale lived in a narrow street behind a chapel. where the bells sounded too large for the roofs beneath them, in 2 rooms above a laundress who knew enough about life to ask no questions when a duke's carriage stopped outside. By every rule of Mayfair propriety, Hester should not have been there. By every rule of truth, she had to be. Lady Pamela had refused to accompany them, declaring that retired servants, missing candle snuffers, and public scandal had finally exceeded the boundaries of reasonable family management. Mr. Selborne had solved the matter by bringing his widowed sister, Mrs. Anstruther, a severe lady with a black bonnet and the moral expression of a church register. Thus, Hester entered Mrs. Vale's small parlour properly attended, with Clement standing near the door as if rank itself had been ordered to wait until called upon. The room smelled of lavender, old wood smoke, and starch. A kettle sang softly on the hob. On the mantel stood 2 china dogs, a Bible, and a pewter candlestick rubbed bright by years of careful hands. Mrs. Vale rose from a chair near the window. She was small, silver-haired, and bent at the shoulders, but her eyes were as sharp as pins. "My lady," she said, curtsying to Hester first, not to the Duke, to Hester. That one courtesy nearly undid her. "Please sit, Mrs. Vale," Hester said. "We are grateful you agreed to see us." "I agreed because I should have spoken sooner if I had known what they made of it." Clement did not move. Hester heard the cost of stillness in him, but he held it. This was her question to ask. Mr. Selborne opened his portfolio on the small table. "Mrs. Vale, tell Lady Hester what you told my clerk." The old woman folded her hands over her apron. "I was candle-room maid at Lady Arkwright's for 22 years. Silver, wax, trimming, storage, that was my work. Not a grand work, but a lady notices when the candles smoke, and a gentleman notices when wax drips on his coat. That night last year, the rose tapers had bayberry in them. Special order, too dear for every day. They were set in the supper room, along the sideboard, and in the sconces near the passage." Hester's hand closed around the reticule in her lap. Inside it, the rose-coloured taper stub lay wrapped in linen. "Do you remember the candles going out?" "I remember them being put out." The kettle hissed. Even Clement's breathing seemed to stop. Mrs. Vale glanced toward him, then back to Hester. "Not all, mind. Enough to make a fuss. The 2 by the sideboard, 1 in the passage, and 1 on the table near the window. I saw Lady Blanche Nettleby with the snuffer. She said a wick was smoking, and she was helping. Ladies sometimes do that when they want to seem useful." Her mouth tightened, but she did not snuff 1 smoking wick. She crossed the room, quick, like she had practiced with her eyes. Hester saw it then, not as memory had first offered it, blurred by humiliation, but with cruel arrangement. Blanche's pale sleeve, the little gasp of ladies amused by sudden dimness. A footman entering the confusion. Clement somewhere beyond the corridor, receiving a note that wore Hester's stolen initials. "And the snuffer?" Hester asked. Mrs. Vale rose slowly and went to a small trunk beside the wall. Clement shifted as if to assist, then stopped when Hester did not move. The old woman opened the trunk and drew out a scrap of folded paper. Not the snuffer, only a sketch, rough but careful, showing a silver handle with a dented lip. "I have not had the true snuffer in my keeping since 2 days ago," she said. "I sent word before I thought better of it. After the supper last year, it vanished from the tray. I found it 3 weeks later in a box of damaged plate sent down for sorting. I should have returned it. But by then the steward had blamed young Thomas in the pantry, and I knew if I spoke, the blame might twist back on someone with less protection than Lady Blanche. I kept it, wrongly perhaps, but I kept it because it had wax under the lip and I knew wax tells stories servants are ordered not to tell. Mr. Selborne leaned forward. Where is it now? In that trunk yesterday morning. Mrs. Vale's face hardened. Gone by afternoon, the lock was not broken. Someone had a key or a clever hand. But before it went, I looked once more. Dented lip, rose wax caught underneath. Black thread from a wick pressed into the metal. Same scent, faint, but there, if you know Bayberry. Hester opened her reticule and unfolded the linen. The taper stub looked humble in the old woman's room, less like romance than labour. Beeswax, wick, smoke, proof. Mrs. Vale did not touch it. She bent over it and inhaled, her eyes closed. That is the same order. You are certain? Hester asked. My lady, I spent 22 years being certain of wax. The answer struck Hester with such unexpected force that a laugh nearly escaped her. Not mirth. Relief sharpened into sound. She swallowed it, and Clement's eyes moved to her face, with a tenderness he did not dare express in motion. Mrs. Vale looked between them. The note was not given because of darkness, she said. The darkness was made for the note. The parlour seemed to tilt around that sentence. It was the shape of everything. Not accident, not gossip blooming from confusion. Design. Hester rapped the taper again, but her fingers did not tremble. Then the truth must be made public. Clement spoke at last, very softly. Only if you wish it. I do. She turned to him. Not whispered, not managed, not corrected in private drawing rooms where everyone can pretend they never believed the lie. I want the room rebuilt as it was. Mr. Selborne's brows rose. A reconstruction? Yes, the candles, the positions, the false note. The snuffer, if it can be found. If they used a room against me, then the room may answer. Clement's gaze held hers. There was pride there, but not possessive pride. It was the look of a man watching courage and understanding he had no right to interrupt it. Then we rebuild it. Mrs. Vale folded her hands again. They will try to frighten me. They won't reach you, Clement said. The words came with ducal certainty, and for once Hester did not resent it, because he looked immediately to her, as if asking whether that was protection or trespass. She answered the unspoken question. Mrs. Vale should not lose comfort because she told the truth, but she must choose what help she accepts. The old woman's chin lifted. I will accept a safer lodging until this is done. Not charity. A temporary household placement, Hester said, with wages. Clement nodded. It shall be arranged, Mrs. Anstruther, who had been silent long enough to become part of the furniture, said, I have a cousin in Bloomsbury who needs a companion housekeeper for 6 weeks. Mr. Selborne made a note. The matter was settled without grandeur, which made it feel more honourable. When they left Mrs. Vale's lodging, dusk had thickened over the chapel street. The carriage waited, lamps lit, horses stamping softly in the traces. Mrs. Anstruther and Mr. Selborne entered first, after a brief consultation about routes. Leaving Hester and Clement at the curb for one narrow moment under the chaperone's watchful eye. It was not privacy. It was something more dangerous in a society that feared honest feeling more than gossip. You were right, Clement said. About what? The truth needed air. Hester looked down at the reticule in her hands. Truth often does. People keep mistaking burial for peace. I did. The admission was quiet. It asked nothing. That was why it reached her. Yes, she said. You did. His mouth tightened, but he did not look away. I will arrange Mrs. Vale's protection with your approval, not as a command. Good. A gust moved along the street, lifting the edge of Hester's shawl and sending chapel soot and cold air through the space between them. She had kept herself composed before Mrs. Vale because the old woman deserved steadiness, not display. Now, with the carriage lamps glowing, and the city pressing in, the delayed force of the revelation struck. The darkness had been made. Her ruin had been arranged by hands that moved through a room while she waited for a man who never came. Her breath caught once. Clement saw it. He did not step forward. "Lady Hester," he said, and the restraint in his voice was almost pain. "May I?" He extended his gloved hand palm upward, not to lead her, not to claim her, to steady if she chose. Hester looked at that hand and remembered refusing his cloak, stopping his defense, touching his palm in her aunt's drawing room for one brief treaty of trust. This was different. The street was cold, the revelation fresh, the chaperone present, and the choice entirely hers. She placed her hand in his fingers closed only after hers settled. No pressure beyond support, no victory. The carriage step waited. Still, neither of them moved. For several heartbeats, the world narrowed to the warmth of his glove around hers, the lamplight on wet cobbles, and the knowledge that he was finally standing beside the wound instead of trying to cover it. Hester tightened her fingers once. Clement's breath changed. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me for being allowed to help," she answered. But her voice had softened before she could prevent it. "Then I won't." He helped her into the carriage with the same careful restraint, releasing her the instant she was safely seated. Yet when he took the place opposite, and Mrs. Anstruther settled beside Hester like a black-bonneted monument to propriety, Hester did not fold her hands away. Clement saw. He asked with his eyes first, then softly, "May I?" This time she gave him her hand across the small space between the seats. His gloved fingers closed around hers, steady and reverent. No one spoke as the carriage began to move. London rolled past in dark windows and amber lamps. In Hester's reticule, the taper stub lay wrapped beside her beating wrist. Somewhere, the true snuffer had vanished again, stolen by fear. But wax remembered. Servants remembered. Rooms remembered. And for the length of the carriage ride, Hester let Clement Vale hold her hand while the truth, at last, began to find its way back to the light. By the following morning, the theft of the silver snuffer had acquired the shape of a fact, and facts, Hester was learning, could be more terrible than rumors because they did not soften when looked at directly. Mrs. Vale had been moved before breakfast to Mrs. Anstruther's cousin's house in Bloomsbury, where she would serve as companion housekeeper for proper wages and sleep behind a door with a sound lock. Clement had arranged the carriage. Hester had approved the arrangement. Mr. Selborne had sent his clerk to examine the old trunk, the lodging stairs, the laundress below, the chapel passage, and the boy who had been seen loitering by the pump the previous afternoon. By noon, Clement came to Wrenford House with news, written in the controlled lines of his face before he spoke a word. Lady Pamela had tried to refuse him entry, then remembered that refusing a duke, who was now associated with Hester's reputation, would create a more delicious story than receiving him. She sat like disapproval carved in satin, while Hester received him in the drawing room, her reticule on the table beside her, the rose taper stub still wrapped within it. Clement did not ask to see the taper. He knew it remained hers. That small restraint passed through Hester like a quiet note of music. "The snuffer was taken by a hired man named Fallow," he said. Selborne's clerk found the laundress's apprentice willing to speak after Mrs. Vale was safely gone. The man entered while Mrs. Vale was downstairs paying for coal. He carried no parcel when he arrived. He carried one beneath his coat when he left. Lady Pamela whispered, "A common thief, then. Could that not be all?" Hester looked at her aunt. a common thief who steals only an old candle snuffer from a retired maid's trunk on the very day we learn it matters? Lady Pamela lowered her eyes. Clement continued. Fallow is attached loosely to several gaming houses and has run errands for Sir Piers Nettleby before. He was seen near Brook Street last evening. Hester absorbed the name without surprise. Sir Piers had smiled too pleasantly at the music-hale. Men with debts often smiled, as if charm could hold off creditors. And now, she asked, now he has vanished from the places he usually drinks. Not vanished, Hester said, sent elsewhere. Clement's eyes sharpened with approval, but he did not praise her as though she were a clever child. Very likely. Mr. Selborne, who had entered behind him and remained near the bookcase with his portfolio, added, a stable boy at the mews behind the Nettleby lodging saw Sir Piers's man carry a wrapped object into the house before midnight. Small, long-handled, wrapped in a stocking. Lady Pamela made a strangled sound. Must we have stockings in the drawing-room? Better a stocking than a lie, Hester said. Clement looked away for one brief moment, and she suspected he did so to hide the expression her answer had drawn from him. It was not amusement exactly. It was admiration warmed by pain. That, too, was dangerous. She could accept his help more easily when it came without tenderness. Can you recover it? She asked. Not without warning him, we know where it is. Clement's voice hardened. I could compel his attention, but not his confession. A duke may frighten a fool into burning evidence faster than a solicitor can secure it. Hester heard the discipline in the admission. Part of him wanted to go at once to Brook Street, place Sir Piers against the wall of his own cowardice, and demand the truth by force of rank. Another part, the part she had made him cultivate through refusal, knew that power used too soon might destroy what little proof remained. Then we let him believe he is clever, she said. Lady Pamela stared. Absolutely not. Hester did not turn. He stole the true snuffer because he knows someone means to produce a false one. Mr. Selborne inclined his head. That is my fear. Clement's gaze stayed on Hester. Lady Blanche has issued invitations for tomorrow evening. A small supper, she calls it, a clearing of reputations. How generous, Hester said. She means to put the false snuffer before witnesses and make Mrs. Vale appear confused or dishonest. Yes, then we need her to do it. Lady Pamela rose. You cannot possibly intend to attend. I intend precisely that. Hester, you are courting ruin. Hester looked at her then. No, Aunt. Ruin has courted me for a year. I am merely refusing to hide from the suitor. Clement's mouth tightened, but he did not interrupt. He had learned the cost of speaking over her. Mr. Selborne opened his portfolio. If Lady Blanche presents a false snuffer, Mrs. Vale can identify what is missing. The false one will lack the dented lip, the trapped rose wax, and the black thread. But without the true snuffer, we have only contradiction. Contradiction can make a guilty person impatient, Hester said. If Sir Piers has the true snuffer nearby, he may try to produce it, hide it, or destroy it when pressed. Clement's face changed. That is a risk to you. Everything has been a risk to me. The difference is that this risk may lead somewhere. Lady Pamela sank back into her chair. Defeated by a kind of courage she could not categorize as either obedience or hysteria, Hester crossed to the small table and opened her reticule. She did not remove the taper, only touched the linen through the opening. The gesture steadied her thoughts. We need witnesses who cannot all be dismissed as sentimental. Selborne, Clement said. Mrs. Anstruther, Mrs. Vale if she consents. Lady Arkwright's steward if he will speak. The laundress's apprentice. Mr. Selborne shook his head. too frightened for a drawing-room. I can take a written statement, but a servant's written word may be called coached. Then protect the servant and use what is stronger, Hester said. Sir Piers's movement, Lady Blanche's false object, Mrs. Vale's memory, my taper, the old note and the new one. Clement looked at her with something so open that she had to look at the table. He had seen her under accusation, under insult, under forced composure. Now he was seeing her mind work. And the sensation of being valued for thought rather than pitied for injury was almost more intimate than his hand had been in the carriage. You should not have had to become so precise about your own humiliation, he said. The words were quiet. They landed softly, which made them hurt. No, Hester said, but precision is what remains when innocence has been made to sound vague. No one answered. For once, silence did not erase her. It honored what could not be politely repaired. The meeting ended with arrangements rather than comfort. Mr. Selb would keep watch on Brook Street through a clerk and a trusted groom. Mrs. Vale would not be brought forward until necessary. Hester would attend Blanche's supper with Lady Pamela, because propriety still had teeth even when justice sharpened its own. Clement would be present but would not speak first. When he rose to leave, Lady Pamela excused herself to write a note she did not need to write, and Mr. Selborne moved to the hall to confer with the footman about delivery times. For one narrow moment, Hester and Clement stood with enough distance between them to satisfy the house and too little to satisfy the heart. The morning light lay across the carpet in pale squares. I dislike this, Clement said. You dislike not controlling it. Yes, the honesty startled her. He did not soften it. And I dislike that the only way to expose them is to let them place you in another room full of eyes. Hester's throat tightened. She had held herself steady through facts, servants, stockings, false snuffers, and Lady Pamela's fear. That simple sentence reached the place beneath strategy. Do not make me reassure you, she said. I am trying not to. His voice lowered. What do you need? She saw the question cost him because every instinct in him wanted to answer it himself. She also saw that he would obey whatever she said. A month ago, she would not have believed that possible. A year ago, she would have mistaken it for love. Now she knew it was only the beginning of trust, which was harder and more valuable. For a breath, he looked as if he might offer his arms, not as claim, not as passion, but as a place to rest after standing too long before the world. Hester felt the pull of it with such sudden force that she nearly stepped forward. She did not because she did not want comfort, but because tomorrow would demand every unblurred edge she possessed. Stand with me tomorrow, she said. Not before me, not after the worst has passed. With me. Clement bowed his head. I will, and if I ask the first question, then the first question will belong to you. She nodded once. That was all. Yet, when he left, Hester remained still for several moments, feeling the shape of the comfort she had not taken. It did not feel like refusal. It felt like saving something for a moment when tenderness would not weaken truth. In her reticule, the rose taper waited, half-burned and stubborn. Somewhere in Brook Street, the stolen snuffer sat in the dark, hidden by a man who believed silver could forget the flame it had smothered. Tomorrow, Hester thought, they would learn that even stolen things remembered their way back to the room. The threat arrived in Clement's hand before it reached Hester's ears, which was why, for the first time since she had known him, a lie did not have the advantage of entering the room ahead of truth. He came to Wrenford House on the 16th day after her return to London, one day before Lady Blanche's promised supper. and asked for Hester with such restrained urgency that even Lady Pamela did not attempt more than one protest before ordering the drawing-room made proper. The hour was late afternoon, defensible by etiquette, though the sky had already begun to dim beyond the tall windows. The door was left open. Lady Pamela sat near the tea-table with her embroidery abandoned in her lap. Hester stood by the mantel, the reticule containing the rose taper laid upon the small table beside her. She saw the paper in Clement's gloved hand before he spoke, and her first thought was not fear. It was anger that paper still believed itself powerful. "Another note," she said. Clement did not try to soften it. "Yes. From whom?" "It is unsigned." "Then from a coward." Lady Pamela made a distressed sound. Clement crossed no farther than the center of the carpet and held the folded sheet out, not to Hester, but toward the table between them. "I brought it at once, before speaking to Selborne, before deciding what should be done." Hester looked at him. "That is new. It should not have taken me a year to learn it." The answer was quiet and bare, and because it asked for nothing, it unsettled her more than a plea would have done. She picked up the paper. The handwriting was deliberately plain, the words chosen for damage rather than elegance. "If His Grace supports Lady Hester tomorrow, London will learn." He courted her in secret, tired of her presumption, and discarded her before she could force his hand. There are enough witnesses willing to remember what they are paid to remember. Let the lady stay home, and the Duke's name may remain clean. Hester read it once, then again. Lady Pamela leaned forward, whispering, "What does it say?" Hester placed the paper on the table. "It says Sir Piers is afraid." Clement's eyes sharpened. "You think it is Piers?" Blanche would have made it prettier, crueler, but prettier. Despite the danger, something like admiration moved across his face. "That was my thought." Lady Pamela rose. "Then this proves you must not attend tomorrow. Hester, for once in your life, choose safety before pride." Hester turned slowly. "Aunt, I have done that in Bath, in silence, in rooms where people lowered their voices when I entered. Safety without truth is only a smaller cage, and scandal without restraint is ruin. Ruin has been offered to me so often that I am beginning to find it tedious." Clement's mouth tightened, not in amusement, but in the effort not to step between them. Hester saw the restraint and understood the test before either of them named it. This was the moment in which the old Clement would have acted. He would have decided the threat was too great, would have sent orders to hosts, printers, and servants, would have placed his influence over her like a roof, and called it shelter. Instead, he stood still, visibly hating the cost of giving her the room. "What did you wish to do when you read it?" Hester asked him. The question struck him cleanly. Lady Pamela looked scandalized that a lady would interrogate a duke's instincts. Clement answered anyway. "I wished to send you word, not to attend." Hester's heart closed, then waited. "And after that?" "I wished to go to Brook Street and make Piers understand that threatening you was the last foolish act of his life." His voice remained calm. That made the force beneath it more evident. "And after that?" Clement looked at the note, then at her. "After that, I remembered you asked me to stand with you tomorrow, not before you." The words entered the space between them and steadied it. Hester did not forgive the first instincts. She did not need to. What mattered was that he had brought them into the light before acting upon them. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "I will attend." Lady Pamela sat down as if her bones had lost argument with the chair. "I will face the room," Hester continued. "I will not be hidden because Sir Piers threatens to invent more memory for sale. but I will not have you speak over me. If a question must be asked first, it will be mine." Clement bowed his head. "Yes, not because you are permitting it. No, because it belongs to you." Hester looked at him for longer than society would have approved, had society not been represented only by her aunt's horrified embroidery. "And if you see them wound me—" His composure faltered then. "Not much. Enough to show the man beneath the Duke. That is what I fear." She had expected some answer about justice, or strategy, or confidence in evidence. Instead, he gave her fear. The room changed. The late light touched the planes of his face, and for one suspended instant, she saw the cost of his restraint. He was not cold because he felt little. He was cold because feeling, when it came, threatened the architecture of him. "I am afraid," he said more quietly, "of watching another room make sport of your pain while I stand close enough to stop it and am asked not to." Hester's throat tightened. Lady Pamela lowered her gaze, perhaps because even she understood that some truths were not improved by chaperoned disapproval. "I am afraid too," Hester said. The confession surprised them both. Her hand moved to the reticule on the table, not opening it, only resting over the place where the rose taper lay wrapped. "Last year, I was foolish enough to think love made one safe." Clement went still. Hester, it was the first time he had used her name without title since his return. It should have angered her. It did not. Perhaps because it sounded not like possession, but pain. She did not correct him. "I waited beside that flame because I believed you would come back," she said. "I loved you enough to make waiting feel honorable, until the room taught me it was humiliation." Clement closed his eyes for half a breath. When he opened them, there was no triumph in having heard she had loved him. No male vanity. Only sorrow disciplined into stillness. "I do not deserve that memory. No, and I will not use it to ask forgiveness." That was when Hester felt the last sharp edge of her control. Tremble, not break. Tremble. She had wanted him once with the innocent ferocity of a woman who believed being seen was the same as being known. Now she knew better. Yet the man before her was not the one who had passed her in the supper room, with a lie in his pocket and pride in his spine. He was still dangerous, because he had power. He was still uncertain, because remorse was not transformation by itself. But he was trying to become truthful in front of her, and there was an intimacy in that no ballroom could have prepared her to withstand. Lady Pamela rose abruptly. "I shall ask for more tea," she said, though no one had touched the first pot. She moved to the doorway and spoke to the footman in the hall, remaining within propriety's range, but granting them the mercy of not listening too closely. The drawing-room door stayed open. The world did not vanish. It merely softened at the edges. Hester took one step toward Clement before she had decided to do it. He did not move. "What do you need?" he asked, the same question he had asked before. But now his voice was roughened by feeling. "Not rescue. I know. Not promises you cannot keep. Then I will make none." Her eyes burned. She hated that. She had not cried when the note was read aloud. She had not cried when Aunt Pamela threatened Bath. She would not cry because a man had finally learned to ask. Yet her breath shook. Clement saw it and remained where he was, hands at his sides, waiting for the choice to be hers. Hester closed the remaining distance by one step. Then another. "You may hold me," she said. The words were scarcely louder than the clock. Clement's breath left him. He did not seize the permission. He received it. "May I?" he asked. A faint, broken laugh escaped her at that, because the permission had already been given and he still needed to be certain. "Yes, Clement." He came to her then, carefully, reverently, his arms closed around her with a restraint that made room for refusal even inside the embrace. For a moment, Hester stood rigid, shocked by the warmth of him, by the solid steadiness of a body that had once been only absence. Then her forehead lowered against his shoulder, and her hands, which had held linen, notes, gloves, and dignity for too long, rested against his coat. She did not forgive him there. She did not forget. She allowed herself to be held without being hidden. That was enough. Clement's voice came near her hair, low and unsteady. Tomorrow, the first question is yours. Hester closed her eyes. And you will stand with me. With you, he said, as long as you permit me. She drew back before comfort could become dependence. He released her at once. Lady Pamela's footsteps sounded in the hall, returning with a footman and unnecessary tea. Hester smoothed her gloves. Clement stepped away, pale with the effort of restraint and something deeper. The threat note still lay on the table, stripped of some of its power, because it had failed to make them silent. Tomorrow, Lady Arkwright's supper room would fill with witnesses. Blanche would bring her false silver. Sir Piers would bring his purchased confidence. London would bring its appetite. Hester lifted the note and folded it once, neatly. Let them prepare their darkness, she said. We shall bring the question. Lady Arkwright's supper room had been arranged to resemble an innocent room, which made Hester trust it less. The rose tapers stood along the sideboard in a disciplined line, their flames reflected in the long mirror until light appeared doubled, and judgment seemed infinite. A silver tray rested beneath them. The small tables had been placed as they had been the year before. By Lady Arkwright's anxious insistence that accuracy was the only shield she possessed against having hosted scandal twice. Near the window stood the same narrow stand for glasses. Beside the passage door, a footman waited with his eyes fixed above every head, as footmen did when households trembled. The company had not been called large, but London had an extraordinary talent for crowding itself into the word small when scandal promised warmth. Ladies with jeweled combs and careful faces stood near the walls. Gentlemen gathered in little islands of black evening coats. Lady Pamela hovered close enough to Hester to claim family loyalty and far enough to deny leadership if the evening collapsed. Clement stood several pulsaces to Hester's right, not before her, not behind her, with her. Hester felt his presence as one feels a lamp in a dark hall, useful, dangerous if mistaken for sunrise. She carried her reticule in both hands. Inside it lay the rose-colored taper stub, wrapped in linen, still hers. Across the room, Lady Blanche Nettleby shone in pale blue satin, with pearls at her throat and tragedy arranged around her eyes. Sir Piers stood near the fireplace, smiling as though debts, theft, forged notes, and frightened servants were all matters of weather that might pass by morning. On the table before Blanche sat a silver candle snuffer. It gleamed too cleanly. Its lip was smooth. Hester saw that at once, and something within her settled. Lies often overdressed for court. Lady Arkwright lifted a shaking hand. My friends, this gathering has been requested in the hope of putting to rest certain unkind misunderstandings. Very kind, Blanche murmured, and the room leaned toward her. No one wishes Lady Hester distress. I have said so from the beginning. Yet when one's name, and his grace's, and even mine have been caught in rumor, truth must be served. Clement shifted half a step. Hester felt it. His old instinct to answer power with power. She lifted her hand and touched his sleeve lightly. The contact was brief, no more than a gloved pressure against dark cloth, but she felt him stop beneath it. He turned his face toward her. She did not look at him. She did not need to. The first question belonged to her. Blanche continued. A retired servant has apparently claimed that a special snuffer vanished last year, bearing mysterious wax beneath its lip. I would not ordinarily dignify such confusion, but Sir Piers has found, among old Arkwright plate, the very object described. She gestured to the table. As you see, no wax, no dent, no secret, only silver, gossip, and an attempt to make last year's unfortunate awkwardness seem criminal. A murmur rose. Hester stepped forward before Clement could be forced to restrain himself again. May I ask where Sir Piers found it? Blanche's lashes fluttered. In Lady Arkwright's storage, I believe. The steward was careless. The steward, a thin man near the door, went red but said nothing. Hester looked at Sir Piers. Did you find it yourself? My dear Lady Hester, he said, with that smooth cruelty men used when they wished to make a woman appear agitated by being precise. I had a man look. One cannot expect ladies to rummage among plate cloths. No, apparently, one expects retired servants to have their trunks rummaged instead. The room tightened. Blanche's smile did not move. Sir Piers's did. I beg your pardon? Hester turned fully toward Blanche. If no true snuffer existed, why did your brother pay a man to steal Mrs. Vale's? The silence that followed was not the silence of embarrassment. It was the silence of a room finding the floor missing beneath the carpet. Clement remained still. Hester knew what that cost him, and for one strange, fierce instant, gratitude moved through her like heat. He had promised. He was keeping it. Blanche recovered first. That is an astonishing accusation. No, Hester said. It is a question. You may answer it. Sir Piers laughed, but the sound came too late. Who is Mrs. Vale? Some servant, coached to remember whatever his grace requires. Clement's voice entered then, cold and measured. Mrs. Vale was candle-room maid in this house for 22 years. She has been placed where she cannot be frightened. Hester glanced at him. He had given fact, not rescue. Then he was silent again. Mr. Selborne stepped from near the bookcase, his portfolio under one arm. I have a statement from the laundress's apprentice who saw a man named Fallow enter Mrs. Vale's lodging shortly after her meeting with Lady Hester and his grace. The same man has previously carried errands for Sir Piers Nettleby. A stable boy behind Brook Street saw a wrapped object brought into Sir Piers' lodging before midnight. Sir Piers' face lost its pleasant idleness. Stable boys see whatever coin teaches them to see. Then perhaps this room will prefer silver, Hester said. She moved to the table and looked down at the snuffer Blanche had presented. Mrs. Vale described a dented lip, rose wax trapped beneath it, and a blackened thread from a wick. This snuffer has none of those things. Blanche gave a soft sigh. Because Mrs. Vale is mistaken. Then why present a different object as the one she described? Different? Blanche's voice sharpened before she could make it sweet again. Hester heard the crack. So did the room. Lady Arkwright's steward took one step forward, pale with embarrassment. My lady, if I may. That snuffer was not from the supper-room service. Lady Arkwright gripped her fan. Mr. Dawlish. The steward bowed. Forgive me, my lady, but it is from the breakfast parlour set. I know the handle. The supper-room snuffer had an engraving at the hinge and a dent in the lip. I made the inventory myself. Blanche's face became very still. Sir Piers turned on the steward. You did not say so when my man found it. Your man did not ask me, sir. He took a wrapped article from storage and said Lady Blanche wished old silver for comparison. A low sound moved through the room. Comparison. The word slipped out of innocence and landed near guilt. Hester opened her reticule. Every eye followed the movement. She withdrew the linen-wrapped taper and unfolded it on the table, keeping one hand near it as if the small object might require protection from the room's appetite. This taper was from last year's supper. I kept it after the candles went out, and His Grace left without asking why. Clement's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. I did, he said, clear enough for everyone. And I was wrong. The admission changed the air more than any denial could have done. Hester let it stand, then continued. Mrs. Vale identified the scent and colour as the same special order. If the true snuffer is found, the wax beneath its dented lip will answer what this false silver cannot. Blanche's fan trembled once. How dramatic. A lady's reputation resting on a burned candle end. No, Hester said. My reputation rested on a lie. This is merely what survived it. Lady Pamela made a small sound behind her, not protest this time. Pain, perhaps, or shame. Sir Piers moved toward the fireplace, his expression rearranging too quickly. Hester saw Clement notice. His body changed with a predator's stillness, but he did not seize the moment. Not yet. Sir Piers, Mr. Selborne said, perhaps you would consent to have your lodging searched for the article described. By what authority? Sir Piers snapped. A duke's offended pride, a servant's fable, a lady's keepsake. Clement's voice turned very soft. Careful. No, your grace, you be careful. The room inhaled. Sir Piers had overstepped, but fear often made rank look negotiable to foolish men. You think because you regret passing over the lady last year, all England must rearrange itself to soothe your conscience. Perhaps the note was real. Perhaps the lady did expect too much. Perhaps you discarded her because, for once a duke's, saw clearly. Hester felt the blow land, but it did not move her. Before Clement could speak, she lifted her hand again. Not touching him this time, only holding the air steady. And if he did see clearly, she said, why did you need darkness? Sir Piers' eyes flashed. Blanche whispered, Piers, too late. The name emerged with fear in it. Mr. Selborne turned slightly. The steward looked toward the fireplace. Hester followed their gazes and saw, half hidden behind the coal screen, the edge of a dark cloth wrapped around something, long and narrow. Sir Piers saw her see it. The room seemed to divide into flame and shadow. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then Sir Piers stepped back, reached toward the fireplace poker, and swung the coal screen aside with a violence made more shocking by the civility of the room. Blanche cried his name again. Clement moved at last, but not past Hester. He moved around her, blocking Sir Piers from the door rather than stealing the truth from her hands. Sir Piers snatched the wrapped object from behind the coal screen. The cloth fell loose. Silver flashed beneath candlelight. The lip was dented. Dark residue clung beneath it, like a secret that had waited a year to breathe. Hester heard Lady Arkwright gasp. She heard Lady Pamela whisper, Merciful heaven! Sir Piers's face had become white with rage and fear. He lifted the snuffer toward the fire. Enough of this servant nonsense. The flames leapt. The room broke into motion. And Hester, standing beside the rose taper that had survived one darkness, understood with perfect clarity that the truth had finally been forced into the light, and the villains had chosen to show everyone exactly how afraid of it they were. Clement reached the hearth before the silver could vanish into flame, but he did not strike Sir Piers, did not seize him by the collar, did not turn the room into the sort of masculine spectacle that would allow everyone to forget why they had gathered. He took the hearthrug in both hands and cast it over the grate with one swift, controlled motion. smothering the flames where the snuffer had struck the iron edge. A hiss of smoke rose. Ladies cried out. Someone knocked a glass from a table. Sir Piers stumbled back with soot on his cuff and fear naked in his face. The true snuffer lay half beneath the rug, not destroyed, not whole in the innocent sense, but saved enough to answer. "No one moves," Clement said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room obeyed him, because rank had finally been used for preservation, not concealment. Mr. Selborne stepped forward with the fireplace tongs and lifted the silver object from the blackened rug. The handle was tarnished where cloth and coal dust had marked it. The lip, dented exactly as Mrs. Vale had described, gleamed darkly beneath the candlelight. Under that bent silver edge clung a crescent of hardened rose wax, scorched at one side, with a black thread pressed into it like a vein. Hester heard herself breathe. For a year, people had spoken of her as though truth were too delicate to survive examination. Yet there it was, ugly, small, stubborn, and visible. A thing hidden in darkness had returned with smoke on it and still carried the shape of the flame. Mr. Selborne laid the snuffer on the silver tray beside Hester's linen-wrapped taper stub. "Lady Hester," he said. "With your permission." Hester unfolded the linen herself. Her hands were steady. She placed the burned rose taper beside the dented snuffer. The two objects seemed almost humble against so much satin, pearl, and horrified pride. Yet the color answered. The scent, faint beneath smoke, answered. The blackened thread answered. Mrs. Vale, standing near Mrs. Anstruther, came forward with her chin lifted. "That is the supper-room snuffer," she said. Dented lip, engraved hinge, wax under the bend, just as I told them. "That wax is from the rose tapers used last May." Blanche laughed once. It was a terrible sound because it tried to be light and failed. An old woman's memory and a lady's keepsake. How touching. "Surely you don't mean to condemn us with candle scraps?" "No," Hester said. "You condemned yourself by bringing a false snuffer first and hiding the true one behind the coal screen." A murmur moved through the room, no longer hungry, but uneasy. Sir Piers wiped soot from his fingers and recovered just enough arrogance to make himself more foolish. "This proves nothing of consequence. Perhaps a servant moved the object. Perhaps Mrs. Vale stole it. Perhaps Lady Hester, who seems attached to theatrical relics, placed the wax there herself." Clement took one step forward. Hester did not stop him, because this was not interruption. This was boundary. "You will not accuse Lady Hester of another act without proof," he said. "You have exhausted London's supply of patience." Sir Piers' eyes flickered. "And you, Your Grace, have found a convenient conscience." The words struck the room, but Clement did not flinch. "Yes," he said. Too late. That is why this room must hear not only what you did, but what I failed to do." Hester looked at him then. His face was pale under the candlelight, but steady. Clement Vale, Duke of Tillingham, a man, born to have rooms bend around him, turned himself toward the company and placed his own pride on the tray beside the damaged silver. "Last year, a note was given to me in darkness. I believed it because it permitted me to mistrust a woman whose honesty frightened me more than any scheme. I did not ask Lady Hester for truth. I accepted paper over character, rumor over courage, and my own pride over her dignity. Sir Piers and Lady Blanche arranged the lie, but I gave it power. For that, Lady Hester suffered publicly while I remained publicly untouched. That was not honor. It was cowardice with a ducal seal." No one spoke. Lady Pamela covered her mouth, and tears stood in her eyes with no permission to fall. Hester felt the old wound open, not to bleed again, but to release what had hardened inside it. Blanche's composure finally fractured. I arranged nothing alone. Sir Piers turned on her. Be silent. Why should I? You needed money. You said, if I became Duchess of Tillingham, your creditors would wait. You said. His Grace was already half caught by that grey little saint, and that one ugly note would restore sense to him. Her voice rose, then broke. You wrote the words. And you snuffed the candles, Piers snapped. You smiled at her while I had the note placed in his hand. The confession came not as repentance, but as mutual destruction. It was enough. Lady Arkwright gripped the back of a chair. Mr. Selborne made notes with grim precision. The steward shut his eyes as if the household itself had been released from blame. Blanche seemed to realize what she had done only after the room had heard it. Her face went white beneath its careful powder. I was desperate, she whispered. No, Hester said. You were ambitious, and you found my humiliation useful. Blanche looked at her, perhaps expecting rage, perhaps begging silently for feminine mercy, now that her own cruelty had failed. Hester gave her truth instead. You did not break my heart. You used the fact that someone else could. That is smaller than power and uglier than envy. Sir Piers made for the door. Clement did not touch him. Two gentlemen stepped aside, then stopped when Clement spoke. Mr. Selborne will arrange for the magistrate to receive statements regarding theft, forged notes, bribed witnesses, and attempted destruction of evidence. Sir Piers, if you leave now, you leave with every eye in this room knowing why. Piers stopped. He looked suddenly much older than his debts. Blanche sank into a chair, abandoned by the very circle that had leaned toward her an hour before. Public ruin did not arrive with thunder. It arrived as women moved their skirts away from hers, and gentlemen ceased pretending not to understand. Lady Pamela came toward Hester, trembling. My dear child, I did not know. Hester looked at her aunt. The apology, if it was one, stood too near excuse. No, but you knew I was suffering, and you preferred me quiet. Lady Pamela lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Then be different, Hester said. Do not be sorry only because the room changed sides. Her aunt's face crumpled, not prettily, not usefully, but perhaps honestly for the first time. Hester did not stay to examine it. The public truth had been spoken. The silver had answered. The villains had shown themselves. The air felt too thick with candles, smoke, and other people's belated pity. Clement turned to her, all ducal command gone from his face. May I accompany you to the garden? He asked. Only if Lady Arkwright permits the door to remain open. Lady Arkwright, still pale, nodded at once. Of course. The garden behind the house was small, enclosed by brick and ivy, with gravel paths pale beneath the evening, and a stone bench near a clipped yew. Music from the house reached them only as a blurred thread. Hester stopped beside the bench, but did not sit. Clement stood several feet away, honoring the distance until she chose otherwise. For a moment neither spoke. The night smelled of damp leaves, soot, and the last sweetness of extinguished wax. You have your truth, he said at last. Some of it, yes, his voice lowered. The rest is that I love you, Hester. I loved you badly when I feared truth, and I love you honestly now. Her eyes closed, not because she wished to escape the words, but because she had once imagined them so often that hearing them in the world felt like pain before it became joy. When she opened her eyes, Clement had not moved. He was not reaching for her. He was waiting as though love itself had no right to cross without permission. I love you, Clement, she said, and his breath caught as if the words had struck him. But I will never again be loved in darkness. No, he said, never, if I cannot love you in daylight. before truth and consequence and your own refusal, then I have not earned even the corner of your hand." The last of her guarded strength trembled. She stepped toward him. "You may ask now." He understood. Still, because he had learned the shape of her courage, he asked, "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she whispered, "but not as forgiveness purchased by proof. No, as a promise I must keep after it." Hester closed the distance herself. His hands rose slowly, giving her time to stop him, then settled with reverent care at her gloved hands. The kiss was gentle, brief, and bright with all that had been delayed. It did not erase the year. It did not pretend pain had been useful because love survived it. It gave the pain a witness and the future a door. When they parted, Clement rested his forehead near hers without touching it. "Let me earn daylight with you," he said. Hester looked back toward the open door, where candlelight spilled across the threshold and no longer looked like judgment. "Then, begin tomorrow," she said, not with a grand vow, with truth that keeps living after the room empties. "Tomorrow," he answered, "and every day you allow after." She gave him her hand, freely this time, and together they stood in the garden while, inside, London learned how very quiet a room could become when a woman's dignity was finally believed. 6 weeks later, London had not become kinder, but it had become accurate, which was a mercy. Hester had learned not to undervalue. The correction began in drawing rooms, as all corrections of consequence did, not with justice, but with surprise. Lady Arkwright wrote to 3 hostesses before breakfast the morning after the reconstruction, and by dinner the same day, the tale had turned its face. Lady Hester Wrenford had not contrived darkness. The candles had been deliberately snuffed. The notes had been forged. The true silver snuffer, dented and stained with rose wax, had been recovered before witnesses. Sir Piers Nettleby had not been received at his club. After the statements reached certain gentlemen who preferred their scandals entertaining but not actionable. Mr. Selborne carried the matter toward a magistrate with the grave patience of a man who knew paper could serve truth as well as lies when honest hands arranged it. Lady Blanche Nettleby disappeared, first from invitations, then from conversation, and finally from London, sent to a remote aunt in Northumberland, whose reputation for discipline was stronger than her reputation for affection. No one said banished. Society disliked words that revealed its machinery. It merely observed that Lady Blanche's health required northern air, just as Hester's had once required Bath. The irony did not heal anything, but it had a clean edge. Sir Piers's debts came into the light more quickly than his remorse, which did not appear at all. Men who had laughed with him at suppers began remembering unpaid wages. A creditor who had been cautious when Piers moved among powerful rooms became less cautious when those rooms closed their doors. The forged notes, the theft from Mrs. Vale's trunk, and the attempted destruction of the snuffer were no longer gossip, but matters of sworn statement. Mrs. Vale remained in Bloomsbury for her 6 weeks, and declared the post too pleasant to leave without proper notice. Clement made certain her wages were generous. Hester made certain Mrs. Vale knew they were wages, not gratitude disguised as charity. Lady Pamela changed more slowly, because pride, unlike scandal, seldom reforms overnight. Yet 2 days after the reconstruction, she stood beside Hester at a small subscription meeting for naval widows, and said, in a voice audible to the ladies nearest the table, "My niece has shown more courage than I allowed myself to. Understand, it was not everything. It was not enough to erase Bath, silence, or the year in which Hester had been treated as a problem best stored away from view. But it was public. It was a beginning. Hester accepted it as she had learned to accept many useful things, without mistaking them for complete things. Clement courted her properly after that, and properly, from a duke, became a kind of penance. He called at respectable hours, never too often for dignity, never too seldom for doubt. He walked with her in Hyde Park, with Lady Pamela or Mrs. Anstruther, near enough to satisfy every lorgnette. He did not send secret notes. He did not ask for private meetings. When a lady attempted to compliment him for his noble defence, he answered, "Lady Hester defended the truth. I merely stopped being an obstacle to it." The first time Hester heard that answer repeated, she sat very still for a moment, because the room had carried her name without bruising it. By the end of June, when Clement invited Lady Pamela and Hester to spend 3 days at Muirfield Park, with his aunt, the Duchess Dowager of Tillingham, every propriety had been arranged like a row of candles set straight before lighting. The journey to Hampshire took the better part of a day. Hester watched London thin into hedgerows, fields, and soft green distances. She had expected to feel trapped by the idea of his estate, by the weight of a ducal house and all the expectation stone could hold. Instead, as the carriage turned through the gates of Muirfield Park, she felt something loosen. The house stood pale against the afternoon, elegant without cruelty, its long windows catching the sun rather than multiplying candlelight. Clement met them on the steps. He did not look like a man receiving a prize. He looked like a man trying not to hope too visibly. "Lady Pamela, Lady Hester," he said, bowing. Then, more quietly, to Hester alone, "Welcome to Muirfield." "Thank you, Your Grace." His eyes warmed at the formality, not with hurt, but with patience. He had learned that some doors opened slowly, and that the hand on the latch must be hers. The Duchess Dowager was a dry, intelligent lady with silver hair, and a cane she used more for emphasis than support. She liked Hester within the hour, chiefly because Hester did not pretend to be overwhelmed by her. After tea, Lady Pamela and the Dowager fell into a discussion of charities, settlements, and the moral failure of young people who confused fashion with furniture. Clement asked, in the presence of both women, whether Hester would care to see the morning room and the small garden beyond it. The Dowager lifted one eyebrow. "Leave the door open, Tillingham." "Of course, ma'am." Hester hid a smile. Clement did not. He led her through a corridor hung with landscapes and into a bright room facing the east lawn. It held no shrine, no theatrical display of suffering, no portrait of repentance commissioned in oil. On a small table near the window stood a silver candlestick, a fresh rose-colored beeswax taper, and beside it the recovered silver snuffer. The snuffer had been cleaned, but not polished into forgetfulness. The dent remained along its lip, a faint dark crescent marked where wax had once clung beneath the silver edge. Hester stopped. Clement remained by the door. "I did not know whether to keep it here or return it to Lady Arkwright," he said. "Mr. Selborne says it must remain available until every statement is complete. After that, it belongs wherever you decide it belongs." Hester approached the table. The new taper was unburned, its wick straight, its color warmer than the old stub's faded rose. "And this? Not a memorial," he said quickly. "I would not make a chapel of your wound. What is it, then? A choice." The word entered the sunlit room without drama. Hester touched the candlestick, not the snuffer. "You have become careful with words. You taught me their cost." "No," she said, looking back at him. "You paid it late. There is a difference." He bowed his head. Yes, no defense. Still, that was what allowed her to reach for the taper box on the table. She struck a flame and held it to the wick. The rose taper caught slowly. Then steadily, a small flame in daylight where no darkness had been arranged around it. Clement watched from where he stood, hands at his sides. "You may come closer," she said. The words changed his face, not triumph. Gratitude, checked by reverence. He crossed the room and stopped beside her, leaving space enough for breath and choice. "Hester," he said. She looked at the flame. "Yes, Clement, I love you." She had heard it once in the garden after truth had torn open the room. Hearing it here, in daylight, after 6 weeks of ordinary conduct, made it gentler and more dangerous. "I know." A flicker of pain touched his mouth before she turned to him and added, "And I love you, still, not because you saved me. Not because they believe me now, because after the worst of your pride was named, you chose to become someone I could meet in daylight." His eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, they were bright. "May I ask you something that you are entirely free to refuse?" "That is the only kind of question I care to answer." He smiled then, not with charm, but with relief. From his coat, he drew a small velvet case, but he did not open it at once. "I will not ask you to accept a title in place of trust, or a house in place of a voice, or my name in place of your own dignity. I ask for the honor of a proper betrothal, and, when you choose the time, marriage. I ask to spend my life proving that love can stand in the room after truth has spoken." Hester looked at the closed case, then at his face. "And if I say no, then I will continue to honor you in every room where your name is spoken." That answer, more than the ring could have done, steadied her heart. She took the case from him and opened it herself. The ring was not enormous, which pleased her. A rose-cut diamond sat between 2 small pearls, bright without shouting. "You chose restraint," she said, "with assistance from my aunt, who said any jewel that looked like apology was vulgar." Hester laughed softly, and the sound felt unfamiliar in the best way. She held out her hand. "Yes, Clement." He did not move until he was sure. Then he slid the ring onto her finger, with care, as if even joy required manners. She lifted her hand and looked at it in the sunlight. No room watched, no accusation waited, no silence demanded performance. The taper flame bent slightly in a draught from the open door, and Clement's hand moved by instinct, then stopped before shielding it. Hester saw and understood. She took up the silver snuffer herself. "Not every flame must be guarded by you," she said. "No," he answered. "Some must be trusted to you." She lowered the snuffer over the rose taper. The flame vanished cleanly, leaving a small curl of smoke that rose, thinned, and disappeared in daylight. Then she set the dented silver down beside the candlestick and reached for Clement's hand. He took it only after her fingers closed around his. In the garden beyond the morning room, roses had opened along the brick wall, and the path curved toward sunlight broken by leaves. At the threshold he paused. "May I kiss you, Lady Hester?" She smiled at the title. "Yes, and you may call me Hester afterward." His kiss was gentle, warmer than the one given under the pressure of revelation, and this time it belonged not to proof, but to peace earned slowly. When they stepped into the garden, she did not walk behind him or before him. She walked beside him, her hand in his, the ring bright on her finger, the old snuffer left in the sunlit room behind them, and the candle that had once meant pain extinguished by her own hand. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.